They make you explain your feelings until you forget the original problem. This is one of the creepiest manipulation tactics narcissists use because it hides inside what looks like a normal conversation. You bring up something they did that hurt you, confused you, or made you feel small. You expect accountability. You expect a simple answer. Instead, they slowly pull you away from the real issue and force you to explain your emotions like you are defending yourself in court. They ask why you felt that way. They question your memory. They challenge your tone. They act as if your reaction is the problem, not their behavior. At first, you try to stay calm. You explain. Then you explain again. Then you start searching for the right words, hoping that if you say it perfectly, they will finally understand. But that is the trap. They are not trying to understand you. They are trying to exhaust you. The longer you talk, the more the original problem disappears. Suddenly, the focus is no longer what they did. The focus becomes your sensitivity, your attitude, your timing, your emotions, and your so-called misunderstanding. This tactic works because kind people naturally want to be heard. Narcissists use that need against you. They keep you clarifying until you feel confused, guilty, and emotionally drained. Eventually, you may even apologize just to end the tension. Over time, this trains you to stay silent. You stop bringing up problems because every conversation becomes a battle for your own reality. And once they make you afraid to speak, they gain control without ever admitting what they did. They apologize with perfect words but change nothing. This is one of the most emotionally confusing tactics narcissists use because their apologies often sound exactly like the kind of apology you have been waiting to hear. They know the right words. They know how to sound remorseful, reflective, and emotionally aware. They say things like, "I understand your pain," "I never wanted to hurt you," or "I promise I'll do better." For a moment, it feels real. You feel relief. You feel hope. You believe maybe this time things will finally change. But then the cycle quietly repeats itself. The behavior returns. The disrespect returns. The manipulation returns. Nothing actually changes except the speech they use after hurting you. That is what makes this tactic so dangerous. The apology becomes a tool for emotional control rather than genuine accountability. Most people are conditioned to believe that apologies mean growth. When someone sounds sincere, we naturally want to forgive them. Narcissists understand this deeply. They study your emotions and learn exactly which words calm your anger and reopen the door. Their apology is not designed to repair the damage. It is designed to stop the consequences. Over time, this creates emotional addiction. You begin chasing the comfort of their apologies instead of paying attention to their actions. You hold on to potential instead of reality. Each apology resets your hope, even while the same pain keeps returning underneath it. Eventually, you may find yourself trapped in a cycle where you are constantly forgiving, but never truly healing. The scariest part is that their words can sound so convincing that you start questioning whether you are expecting too much, even while your emotional wounds keep getting deeper. They act confused, so you start doubting what you clearly saw. This is one of the most psychologically disturbing tactics narcissists use because it attacks your trust in your own mind. You witness something clearly. Maybe they lied, crossed a boundary, changed their story, or treated you with obvious disrespect. In that moment, you know exactly what happened, but instead of admitting it, they suddenly act confused, calm, and completely unaware of what you are talking about. They stare at you like your concerns make no sense. They say things like, "What are you even talking about?" or "You completely misunderstood that." Sometimes they laugh softly, as if your reaction is irrational. Other times they act genuinely puzzled, forcing you to explain the situation again and again until your certainty slowly begins to weaken. That is the trap. Narcissists understand that confidence can be broken through confusion. The calmer they appear, the more emotional you become. The more emotional you become, the more they use your reaction as proof that you are unstable or overthinking. Slowly, the conversation stops being about what they did and starts becoming about whether your perception can even be trusted. This tactic is dangerous because human beings rely heavily on emotional validation to feel secure in reality. When someone repeatedly denies obvious behavior with complete confidence, your brain begins searching for another explanation. You replay memories, you question details, you wonder if maybe you were too sensitive or misunderstood the situation entirely. Over time, this creates deep self-doubt. You stop trusting your instincts. You become hesitant to confront them because every conversation leaves you mentally exhausted and uncertain. And once someone can make you doubt your own eyes, they gain a terrifying level of control over your reality. They give tiny kindness after long cruelty, so you feel grateful. This is one of the darkest manipulation tactics narcissists use because it slowly changes your understanding of what love and kindness should feel like. After days, weeks, or even months of emotional coldness, criticism, disrespect, or silent punishment, they suddenly do something small that feels unbelievably comforting. Maybe they speak gently for once. Maybe they give you attention after ignoring you. Maybe they offer a compliment, buy you something small, or act affectionate for a brief moment. And somehow, that tiny act feels enormous. That is exactly how the trap works. Narcissists create emotional starvation first. They drain you of warmth, safety, and validation until even the smallest amount of kindness feels like relief after suffering. Your brain begins attaching intense emotional value to crumbs because you have been deprived for so long. This creates a powerful psychological bond known as intermittent reinforcement. Human beings become emotionally addicted to unpredictable rewards. The uncertainty keeps you attached because part of you keeps waiting for the next moment of warmth. You begin focusing more on the rare kindness than the constant cruelty surrounding it. Over time, this completely distorts your emotional standards. You start feeling grateful for basic decency that should have been normal from the beginning. You celebrate small improvements while ignoring the deeper pattern of harm. Sometimes you even defend them to other people because those tiny moments of affection feel emotionally real to you. That is what makes this tactic so dangerous. The narcissist teaches you to survive on emotional crumbs while convincing you that you are lucky to receive them at all. Eventually, you stop asking for healthy, consistent love because your mind becomes conditioned to accept temporary relief instead of genuine emotional safety. They turn your calm reaction into proof that you don't care. This is one of the most frustrating manipulation tactics narcissists use because it punishes emotional maturity and rewards emotional chaos. When they hurt you, disappoint you, or disrespect you, they often expect a strong emotional reaction. They want anger, tears, desperation, or emotional begging because those reactions remind them that they still have emotional control over you. But when you respond calmly, everything changes. Instead of appreciating your self-control, they suddenly twist your calmness into something negative. They say things like, "You obviously don't care," "You're so cold," or, "If this relationship mattered to you, you would be more emotional." In that moment, your maturity becomes evidence against you. That is the trap. Narcissists often feel uncomfortable when they cannot emotionally control the atmosphere around them. A calm response removes the drama they feed on, so they attempt to provoke guilt instead. They want you to believe that healthy emotional control is actually emotional neglect. Slowly, they train you to think that peace means indifference and that emotional suffering is proof of love. This tactic becomes psychologically exhausting because it creates a no-win situation. If you react emotionally, they call you unstable or dramatic. If you remain calm, they accuse you of being heartless or disconnected. Either way, the attention shifts away from their behavior and onto your reaction. Over time, this can make you question your own emotional instincts. You may start forcing emotional reactions just to prove you care. You may feel guilty for staying composed even when you are deeply hurt inside. That is the disturbing power of this tactic. They manipulate the meaning of your emotions until even your calmness becomes something you feel ashamed of. They remember your wounds better than your boundaries. This is one of the creepiest signs of a narcissist because it reveals what they are truly paying attention to. When you open up to them about your pain, insecurities, fears, childhood wounds, or past betrayals, it often feels comforting at first. They listen closely. They seem deeply interested in your emotions. You believe they finally understand you on a level other people never did. But over time, something disturbing begins to happen. They forget the boundaries you clearly communicated, yet somehow they remember every emotional weakness you ever revealed. They may ignore your request for respect, privacy, honesty, or space, but they never forget the things that hurt you most. In arguments, they suddenly bring up your deepest insecurities with terrifying precision. They know exactly which words trigger shame, fear, guilt, or emotional panic inside you. That is not accidental. Narcissists study emotional vulnerabilities because wounds are easier to control than boundaries. Boundaries limit their access to you, while emotional wounds give them access to your reactions. The more emotionally reactive you become, the easier it is for them to manipulate conversations, shift blame, and keep psychological control over the relationship. This tactic becomes even more painful because the person who once felt emotionally safe slowly becomes the person who knows exactly how to hurt you. Sometimes they use subtle comments. Sometimes they weaponize private confessions. Other times they reopen old emotional scars during moments when you are already vulnerable. Over time, this creates emotional paranoia. You begin fearing honesty because every vulnerable truth feels dangerous. You stop expressing your real feelings because part of you expects them to be used against you later. And once vulnerability no longer feels safe, emotional intimacy slowly starts turning into emotional survival. They use your honesty as a map to control you later. This is one of the creepiest things narcissists do because they often encourage vulnerability long before they begin using it against you. In the beginning, they seem deeply interested in your thoughts, your fears, your past, and your emotional wounds. They ask thoughtful questions. They listen closely. They make you feel safe enough to open parts of yourself you normally protect from others. That feeling of emotional safety is what makes the manipulation so dangerous. Most people believe honesty creates connection. Narcissists understand that honesty also creates access. Every insecurity you reveal becomes information they quietly store away for later. They learn what hurts you, what triggers you, what makes you feel guilty, what you fear losing, and what emotional buttons can control your reactions. At first, you may not notice it happening. Then one day, during an argument, they suddenly use your deepest insecurities against you with terrifying precision. They bring up painful memories you trusted them with. They attack the exact areas where your confidence is weakest. Sometimes they subtly remind you of your past failures or fears in ways designed to destabilize you emotionally. This tactic works because betrayal hurts more when it comes from someone who once made you feel understood. The very things that once created intimacy become weapons. Over time, this can make you terrified of vulnerability itself. You begin guarding your emotions because you learn that honesty can later become ammunition in someone else's hands. That is why this tactic feels so psychologically violating. It turns emotional connection into surveillance. The narcissist studies your inner world not to protect it, but to understand how to influence, weaken, and control you more effectively once your trust has fully opened the door. They make you feel guilty for noticing patterns. This is one of the most dangerous psychological tactics narcissists use because it punishes your awareness instead of their behavior. At first, you begin noticing repeated actions that do not feel accidental anymore. Maybe they only become affectionate when they need something. Maybe they disappear whenever accountability appears. Maybe every argument somehow ends with you apologizing, even when they hurt you first. When you finally point out the pattern, they do not address it directly. Instead, they make you feel guilty for even noticing it. They accuse you of overthinking, holding grudges, being negative, or keeping score. Suddenly, your ability to recognize repeated behavior becomes the real problem. That is how they protect the cycle. Narcissists understand that patterns expose truth. One mistake can be explained away. Two mistakes can sound accidental, but repeated behavior reveals intention. The moment you start connecting those emotional dots, their control becomes threatened. So instead of changing, they attack your perception. This tactic works because emotionally healthy people naturally want to avoid seeming unfair or paranoid. When someone accuses you of being too suspicious or too critical, part of you immediately begins questioning yourself. You start wondering if maybe you are exaggerating, maybe you should let it go, maybe you are being too sensitive. Over time, this creates emotional blindness. You stop trusting your instincts even when the evidence keeps repeating itself. You begin ignoring red flags because confronting them makes you feel guilty instead of empowered. That is what makes this manipulation so disturbing. The narcissist slowly trains you to disconnect from your own pattern recognition, even though that instinct was originally trying to protect you. And once you stop trusting what you consistently see, you become far easier to control emotionally. They punish you quietly, then deny anything is wrong. This is one of the creepiest manipulation tactics narcissists use because the punishment is often invisible to everyone except you. There are no obvious arguments, no screaming, and no direct threats. Instead, the narcissist changes emotionally. Their warmth disappears. Their tone becomes cold. Their replies become shorter. They suddenly act distant, irritated, or emotionally unavailable. But when you ask what is wrong, they calmly insist that everything is completely fine. That contradiction is what slowly destroys your peace. You can feel the tension in the room. You can sense the withdrawal, the resentment, and the silent hostility, yet they continue pretending nothing has changed. This creates intense emotional confusion because your instincts are telling you something is wrong while their words are telling you the opposite. Over time, you begin doubting your own emotional perception. That is exactly what they want. Narcissists often use silent emotional punishment to control behavior without openly taking responsibility for it. Maybe you disagreed with them, set a boundary, questioned their actions, or simply did something they disliked. Instead of discussing the issue directly, they punish you indirectly through emotional distance and coldness. Then, when you react to the tension, they make you seem irrational for even noticing it. This tactic is deeply damaging because human beings naturally seek emotional safety and connection. When affection and warmth suddenly disappear, your brain immediately starts searching for what you did wrong. You become anxious, hyper-aware, and desperate to restore peace. Eventually, you may start apologizing for things you never did just to make the uncomfortable silence end. And once someone can control your emotions without ever saying a word, their power over you becomes frighteningly strong. They make basic respect feel like a reward. This is one of the most dangerous psychological tactics narcissists use because it slowly lowers your standards without you realizing it. In healthy relationships, respect is normal. Kindness, honesty, listening, and consideration are supposed to be basic foundations of human connection. But narcissists slowly turn these basic behaviors into rare emotional rewards that you feel lucky to receive. At first, the disrespect is subtle. They interrupt you, dismiss your feelings, ignore your boundaries, or speak to you with coldness during certain moments. Then suddenly, after periods of emotional tension, they become polite, affectionate, or attentive for a short time. They may listen carefully for once, speak gently, or show small acts of consideration that should have existed from the beginning. And somehow, it feels special. That is how emotional conditioning begins. When someone repeatedly deprives you of basic emotional safety, your brain starts craving even the smallest moments of kindness. The narcissist creates emotional scarcity so that normal respect begins to feel extraordinary. Instead of expecting healthy treatment consistently, you begin celebrating temporary moments where they simply act decent. Over time, this changes your perception of love. You become deeply grateful for behaviors that should never have required gratitude in the first place. You may even start defending them because they can be sweet sometimes, while ignoring the constant emotional damage happening underneath those brief moments of warmth. This tactic is powerful because it trains you to accept less and less while feeling emotionally dependent on tiny doses of approval. Eventually, you stop asking for real consistency because your emotional system becomes trapped chasing occasional relief. And once someone convinces you that basic respect is a privilege instead of a standard, controlling you becomes far easier. They create chaos, then act like the victim of your reaction. This is one of the most mentally exhausting tactics narcissists use because it forces you into emotional situations they created, then punishes you for reacting to them. They provoke arguments, ignore boundaries, lie, disappear emotionally, insult you indirectly, or create tension for hours or days. They push and push until your emotions finally overflow. The moment you react with frustration, anger, tears, or exhaustion, they suddenly shift roles and act as though they are the one being attacked. That sudden reversal is what makes the manipulation so disturbing. Instead of focusing on what caused the situation, the entire attention turns toward your reaction. They say things like, "Look how crazy you're acting," or "I can't believe you're treating me this way." Suddenly, the chaos they created disappears from the conversation, and now you are defending your emotions while they present themselves as calm, wounded, and misunderstood. Narcissists understand something very dangerous about human psychology. Most people judge situations based on visible reactions rather than hidden causes. The person crying, yelling, or emotionally overwhelmed often appears unstable, while the person acting calm appears innocent. Narcissists exploit this perfectly. They provoke emotional explosions quietly, then use your reaction as evidence against you. Over time, this creates deep emotional confusion. You begin questioning whether your reactions are the real problem. You may even start suppressing your emotions entirely just to avoid giving them something they can use against you later. That is what makes this tactic so destructive. The narcissist creates the emotional fire, watches you burn in it, then points at the flames and convinces everyone that you are the danger. Eventually, you become so focused on controlling your reactions that you stop noticing who keeps causing the pain in the first place. They call your boundaries attitude. This is one of the most manipulative tactics narcissists use because it turns self-respect into something that feels wrong. The moment you finally begin saying no, protecting your peace, or refusing behavior that hurts you, they immediately change the narrative. Suddenly, you are not setting boundaries. You are being difficult, acting different, or having an attitude. That shift is intentional. Narcissists become uncomfortable when they lose unrestricted access to your emotions, time, or energy. When you stop tolerating disrespect, they often react as though your boundaries are a personal attack against them. Instead of respecting your limits, they criticize the way you delivered them. They focus on your tone instead of the reason you were forced to protect yourself in the first place. This tactic works because many people are conditioned to associate kindness with constant availability. So when someone accuses you of being cold, rude, or selfish, part of you instantly feels guilty. You begin softening your boundaries just to avoid conflict. You start over-explaining yourself. Sometimes you even apologize for protecting your own emotional well-being. Over time, this creates a dangerous emotional pattern. You become afraid to speak firmly because every act of self-protection gets treated like aggression. The narcissist slowly trains you to prioritize their comfort over your own mental peace. That is what makes this tactic so psychologically damaging. It teaches you to feel guilty for defending yourself. Eventually, you may begin tolerating things that deeply hurt you simply because you fear being labeled difficult again. The frightening part is that healthy boundaries often only look like attitude to people who benefited from you having none. And once someone convinces you that protecting yourself is wrong, controlling you becomes far easier than it should ever be. They make you feel responsible for their mood. This is one of the most emotionally draining tactics narcissists use because it slowly turns you into an emotional caretaker instead of an equal human being. Their happiness becomes your responsibility. Their anger becomes your fault. Their stress becomes something you feel pressured to fix. Over time, you stop focusing on your own emotional needs because you become completely consumed by managing theirs. At first, it may seem subtle. They become cold after something small, and suddenly you feel guilty. They sigh heavily, act irritated, or withdraw emotionally, forcing you to figure out what went wrong. Sometimes they never directly blame you at all. Instead, they create an atmosphere where you constantly feel responsible for restoring their peace. That is the trap. Narcissists understand that emotionally empathetic people naturally want harmony, so they use emotional tension as a form of control. If they are upset, the entire environment changes. Conversations become uncomfortable. Affection disappears. The room feels heavy. Eventually, you begin monitoring your words, tone, and behavior just to avoid triggering another shift in their mood. This creates a dangerous psychological pattern where you slowly abandon yourself. You stop asking whether your own feelings are being respected because all your energy goes toward preventing their emotional reactions. You become hyper-aware of their moods while becoming disconnected from your own emotional reality. Over time, this can create constant anxiety. You may feel nervous when they enter the room. You may replay conversations in your mind, trying to figure out what caused their attitude. Sometimes you even apologize automatically before knowing what you supposedly did wrong. That is what makes this tactic so destructive. They train you to believe that keeping them emotionally stable is your responsibility, while they take no responsibility for how their behavior affects you. They praise you only when you are useful. This is one of the coldest manipulation tactics narcissists use because it teaches you that your value depends entirely on what you provide for them. In the beginning, their compliments can feel incredibly powerful. They make you feel intelligent, special, attractive, supportive, talented, or irreplaceable. But slowly, a painful pattern begins to appear. Their praise only comes when you are serving a purpose that benefits them emotionally, financially, socially, or psychologically. They admire you when you solve their problems. They praise you when you give them attention, validation, loyalty, favors, or emotional support. They become warm when you sacrifice your time and energy to make their life easier. But the moment you stop being useful, the affection fades almost instantly. Suddenly, they become distant, critical, impatient, or emotionally unavailable. That is because the praise was never truly about you. Narcissists often see relationships through the lens of usefulness rather than genuine emotional connection. Compliments become tools of reinforcement. Just like rewards train behavior, their praise conditions you to keep giving more of yourself in exchange for emotional approval. Over time, you begin associating your worth with how much you can provide. This creates deep emotional exhaustion because you start feeling like love must always be earned. You become afraid to disappoint them, afraid to rest, and afraid to stop performing. Sometimes you even overextend yourself emotionally just to receive another small moment of validation. The terrifying part is how slowly this changes your self-worth. Instead of feeling valued for who you are, you begin feeling valuable only for what you do. And once someone conditions you to believe your worth depends on usefulness, they can keep taking from you while making you feel grateful for the little approval they give back. They act loving in public and cold in private. This is one of the most emotionally isolating tactics narcissists use because it makes you question your own reality while making everyone else admire them. In public, they appear caring, affectionate, supportive, and emotionally attentive. They smile at you, compliment you, hold your hand, and speak in ways that make outsiders believe you are deeply loved. People around you may even envy the relationship because everything looks perfect from the outside. But behind closed doors, everything changes. The warmth disappears, the attention fades, their voice becomes colder, their patience vanishes, and the emotional distance becomes painfully obvious. Sometimes they ignore you for hours. Sometimes they criticize you constantly or make you feel emotionally invisible. The contrast between their public behavior and private treatment becomes so extreme that it leaves you mentally confused. That confusion is part of the manipulation. Narcissists carefully protect their public image because admiration and validation are extremely important to them. By acting loving in front of others, they create witnesses for a false version of reality. If you ever try to explain the emotional pain happening privately, people may struggle to believe you because they only saw the charming version of the narcissist. This tactic also traps you psychologically. The public affection gives you hope that the loving version of them is real, while the private coldness leaves you constantly trying to earn that warmth again. You begin chasing moments of affection that only seem to exist when other people are watching. Over time, this creates emotional loneliness that is difficult to explain. You feel unseen, unheard, and emotionally abandoned while everyone around you believes you are loved. And that hidden contradiction slowly makes you feel like you are living beside two completely different people inside the same body. They make you chase the version of them you met at the beginning. This is one of the cruelest manipulation tactics narcissists use because it traps you inside hope. In the beginning, they often appear almost perfect. They are attentive, understanding, affectionate, and emotionally present in ways that feel rare and unforgettable. They study your dreams, your insecurities, your emotional needs, and they become exactly the person you always wanted to meet. For a while, the connection feels intense, safe, and deeply meaningful. Then, slowly, that version of them begins disappearing. The warmth becomes inconsistent. The attention fades. The emotional closeness turns cold and unpredictable. You start noticing behaviors that completely contradict the person you first met. But instead of walking away, you become emotionally focused on getting that original version back. That is the trap. Narcissists understand that first impressions create emotional attachment. The idealized version they show you in the beginning becomes a psychological anchor in your mind. Even after repeated disappointment, part of you keeps believing that the real them is still hidden underneath the cruelty, distance, or manipulation. So you try harder. You become more patient, more understanding, more forgiving, hoping your love will somehow bring the old version back again. This creates a painful emotional cycle where you stop responding to who they are now and start chasing who they used to pretend to be. The occasional moments of kindness only strengthen the illusion, making you believe the person from the beginning still exists. Over time, you become emotionally exhausted, chasing temporary glimpses of someone who was never fully real. And the frightening part is that narcissists often know exactly how much affection to give you to keep the hope alive without ever truly changing. They tell half-truths so you cannot easily prove the lie. This is one of the most dangerous manipulation tactics narcissists use because it keeps you trapped in confusion instead of certainty. A complete lie can eventually be exposed, but a half-truth is far more difficult to challenge because parts of it are technically real. They carefully mix honesty with deception, giving just enough truth to sound believable while hiding the part that would completely change your understanding of the situation. That is what makes this tactic so psychologically exhausting. When you confront them, they immediately focus on the truthful part of the story. If you question them, they defend themselves with details that are accurate, making you look unreasonable for doubting them at all. Suddenly, the conversation shifts away from the hidden deception and toward whether you are being paranoid, suspicious, or unfair. Narcissists use this tactic because it creates uncertainty instead of direct evidence. Your instincts tell you something feels wrong, but you struggle to explain exactly why. You may catch inconsistencies, strange gaps, or missing details, yet you cannot fully prove the deception. That uncertainty slowly eats away at your confidence. Over time, this creates emotional dependence on the narcissist's version of reality. You begin second-guessing your intuition because the lie is never completely obvious. Part of you keeps thinking, maybe I'm overreacting because some of what they said is true. That is the trap. Half-truths are designed to keep you mentally stuck between trust and suspicion. The narcissist remains believable enough to avoid accountability while keeping you emotionally confused enough to stay under their control. Eventually, you spend more energy trying to solve the puzzle of their behavior than protecting your own emotional peace. They use silence to train you to apologize first. This is one of the most emotionally suffocating tactics narcissists use because the punishment is invisible. There are no screaming matches, no obvious threats, and sometimes no direct insults at all. Instead, they suddenly become quiet, cold, distant. Their energy changes completely, and you can feel it immediately. The warmth disappears from the room, and without saying a word, they make you feel like something is terribly wrong. At first, you try to understand what happened. You ask questions. You attempt to communicate calmly, but the silence continues. They ignore your messages, give short answers, avoid eye contact, or act emotionally unavailable while pretending nothing is wrong. The tension becomes unbearable because human beings are emotionally wired to seek connection and resolution. Silence from someone emotionally important can trigger anxiety, fear, and even panic. That is exactly why narcissists use it. The silence is not about needing space, it is about control. They know prolonged emotional distance creates discomfort, so they wait for the pressure to build inside you. Eventually, you begin apologizing just to restore peace, even when you did nothing wrong. The more this pattern repeats, the more your brain becomes conditioned to fear emotional disconnection. Over time, you stop focusing on whether your feelings are valid. Your only goal becomes ending the silence. You begin apologizing faster, staying quieter, and avoiding conflict entirely because you know what emotional punishment follows disagreement. This tactic is especially dangerous because it slowly rewires your emotional behavior. You become hyper-aware of their moods and terrified of upsetting them. Eventually, their silence controls your actions more than their words ever could. And once someone trains you to fear emotional withdrawal, they no longer need to argue to maintain power over you. They accuse you of what they are doing. This is one of the most disturbing manipulation tactics narcissists use because it completely reverses reality and places you in a constant state of confusion and self-defense. They lie, manipulate, flirt with others, hide things, disrespect boundaries, or play emotional games behind your back. But instead of feeling guilty, they suddenly accuse you of being dishonest, manipulative, untrustworthy, or emotionally unstable. The accusation often feels shocking because it comes out of nowhere. You may have been loyal, honest, and emotionally invested, yet somehow you find yourself defending against behaviors that actually belong to them. That is exactly how this tactic works. Narcissists project their own actions, intentions, and guilt onto other people because it helps them avoid accountability while emotionally destabilizing their target at the same time. Psychologically, this tactic is powerful because human beings naturally feel the urge to defend themselves when falsely accused. Instead of focusing on what the narcissist is doing, your energy becomes consumed by proving your innocence. You begin explaining yourself, defending your character, checking your own behavior, and questioning whether you somehow caused the situation. Meanwhile, the narcissist quietly escapes scrutiny. This tactic becomes even more damaging over time because repeated accusations slowly affect your self-perception. Even when you know you are innocent, constant blame can create guilt, anxiety, and emotional exhaustion. You may start overanalyzing your words, your actions, and even harmless interactions because you are afraid of triggering another accusation. That is what makes this manipulation so psychologically dangerous. The narcissist shifts the emotional spotlight away from their own behavior and places it entirely onto you. Eventually, you become so busy defending yourself that you stop noticing the person who keeps creating the damage in the first place. They make you feel selfish for needing peace. This is one of the most emotionally draining tactics narcissists use because it slowly convinces you that protecting your mental health is somehow unfair to them. Whenever you ask for space, calm communication, emotional stability, or a break from constant tension, they react as though you are abandoning them, disrespecting them, or becoming cold. Instead of understanding your exhaustion, they make you feel guilty for even wanting peace in the first place. That guilt becomes the weapon. Narcissists often thrive in emotional chaos because confusion and instability keep people easier to control. When you begin craving quiet, balance, or emotional distance from the drama, it threatens the emotional power they hold over you, so they twist your need for peace into something selfish. They say things like, "You only care about yourself," "You're avoiding problems," or "You've changed." Suddenly, your attempt to protect your emotional well-being becomes evidence that you are the problem. This tactic works because caring people naturally want to avoid hurting others. When someone accuses you of being selfish, your instinct is to explain yourself, stay available, and sacrifice your comfort to prove you still care. Over time, you begin tolerating emotional exhaustion because resting or pulling away makes you feel guilty. The frightening part is that eventually you stop listening to your own emotional limits. You remain in draining conversations longer than you should. You keep accepting chaos just to avoid being labeled uncaring. Little by little, your nervous system becomes trapped in constant tension. And that is how narcissists slowly condition people to believe that suffering is kindness, while peace becomes something they feel ashamed for needing. They turn every conversation into a courtroom. This is one of the most mentally exhausting tactics narcissists use because you slowly stop feeling like a partner, friend, or loved one and start feeling like someone constantly standing trial. Every disagreement becomes an interrogation. Every emotion requires evidence. Every concern you raise is treated like an accusation that must be defended with perfect logic, exact wording, and detailed proof. Instead of listening to your feelings, they immediately begin analyzing your delivery, your memory, your timing, or the specific words you used. If you forget one detail, they focus on that mistake instead of the actual issue. If you become emotional, they use your emotions as proof that your argument is unreliable. Suddenly, the conversation is no longer about what hurt you. It becomes a debate about whether you deserve to feel hurt at all. That is the trap. Narcissists often approach conversations like lawyers trying to win rather than people trying to understand. Their goal is not emotional resolution, their goal is control. They constantly force you into defense mode because defensive people become easier to confuse, exhaust, and overpower emotionally. Over time, this creates deep anxiety around communication. You begin rehearsing conversations in your head before speaking. You carefully calculate every word because you know they will search for weaknesses in your phrasing. Sometimes you stay silent completely because arguing feels emotionally impossible. This tactic is especially damaging because healthy relationships are built on emotional safety, not cross-examinations. Human beings need space to express imperfect emotions without feeling attacked or dissected. But narcissists turn vulnerability into a battlefield, and eventually you stop speaking from the heart because you become too focused on surviving the interrogation that follows every honest conversation. They make you defend your memory. This is one of the most disturbing psychological tactics narcissists use because it slowly destroys your confidence in your own reality. You remember something clearly: a conversation, a promise, a lie, a cruel comment, a moment that hurt you deeply. In your mind, the memory feels real and undeniable, but when you bring it up, they immediately challenge it with complete confidence. They say things like, "That never happened," "You're remembering it wrong," or "You always twist everything." Sometimes they even retell the event in a completely different way, adding details that never existed while removing the parts that exposed their behavior. The more certain you are, the calmer they become. And the calmer they become, the more you begin questioning yourself. That is the trap. Narcissists understand that memory is deeply connected to identity and emotional stability. If they can make you doubt your recollection of events, they can slowly weaken your ability to trust yourself. Instead of focusing on what they did, you become trapped, trying to prove that your own experience actually happened. Over time, this becomes mentally exhausting. You replay conversations in your head. You overanalyze tiny details. You search through messages, dates, and memories just to reassure yourself that you are not imagining things. Sometimes you even begin apologizing for situations you originally knew were wrong. This tactic is especially dangerous because it creates emotional dependency. Once you stop trusting your own memory, you start relying on their version of reality instead. That gives them terrifying psychological power. Eventually, you may feel anxious every time you confront them because you already expect to leave the conversation confused, guilty, and unsure of your own mind. They say you're too sensitive when they hurt you. This is one of the most damaging psychological tactics narcissists use because it slowly teaches you to distrust your own emotions. They say something cruel, disrespectful, humiliating, or emotionally hurtful, and the moment you react, they immediately shift the focus away from what they did and onto how you responded. Instead of acknowledging the pain they caused, they calmly dismiss your feelings with phrases like, "You're too sensitive," "You take everything personally," or "You're overreacting again." At first, you try to explain why their words hurt you. You believe maybe they simply misunderstood your feelings. But narcissists are rarely confused about the damage they cause. In many cases, they know exactly where your emotional wounds are and deliberately touch them. Then, Once you react emotionally, they make your reaction seem like the real issue. That is the trap. This tactic works because human beings naturally want emotional validation. When someone repeatedly dismisses your feelings, your brain begins questioning whether your emotional responses are actually reasonable. Over time, you may start silencing yourself before speaking, second-guessing your instincts, or feeling guilty simply for being hurt. The most disturbing part is that this manipulation slowly lowers your emotional standards. You begin tolerating disrespect because you fear being labeled dramatic or difficult. Small acts of cruelty become normalized. Pain becomes something you feel pressured to hide. Eventually, you may become emotionally disconnected from yourself entirely. Instead of asking, "Was that behavior hurtful?" you start asking, "Am I allowed to feel hurt?" And once someone gains the power to make you question your own emotions, they gain frightening control over the way you experience reality itself. They act wounded when you ask for accountability. This is one of the most emotionally manipulative tactics narcissists use because it completely reverses the roles in the conversation. You approach them calmly about something they did that hurt you, crossed a boundary, or damaged your trust. You expect honesty, responsibility, or at least a mature discussion. Instead, they suddenly behave as though your accountability itself is the real attack. Their tone changes instantly. They look hurt, disappointed, emotionally overwhelmed, or deeply offended that you would even question them. Sometimes they become quiet and distant. Other times, they accuse you of being cruel, unfair, or impossible to please. Suddenly, the focus is no longer their behavior. The focus becomes the emotional pain they claim your confrontation caused them. That is the trap. Narcissists understand that emotionally healthy people do not enjoy hurting others. So by acting wounded, they trigger your empathy and guilt. Instead of holding them accountable, you begin comforting them. You soften your words. You start explaining yourself carefully so they do not feel attacked. In many cases, you end up apologizing even though you were the one who was hurt in the first place. Over time, this creates emotional conditioning. You begin associating accountability with guilt and emotional chaos. Eventually, you stop bringing up problems altogether because every conversation leaves you feeling like the villain. This tactic is psychologically dangerous because it protects harmful behavior without ever resolving it. The narcissist avoids responsibility by making accountability feel emotionally unsafe. And once someone trains you to fear confronting them, they gain the freedom to repeat the same damaging behavior while keeping your silence at the same time. They use your kindness as free access. This is one of the saddest manipulation tactics narcissists use because it slowly teaches kind people that their compassion will be exploited instead of respected. At the beginning, your kindness feels natural. You listen when they are struggling. You forgive mistakes. You give second chances. You try to understand their pain instead of judging them harshly. But over time, the narcissist stops seeing your kindness as something valuable and starts seeing it as unlimited access to your time, emotions, energy, and patience. That is where the danger begins. They learn that you will stay even after disrespect. They notice how much you tolerate, how quickly you forgive, and how deeply you care about keeping peace. Instead of appreciating those qualities, they quietly begin taking advantage of them. The more understanding you become, the more entitled they feel to your emotional availability. Soon, your kindness stops being treated like a gift and starts being treated like an obligation. They expect you to always answer, always help, always forgive, and always remain emotionally available no matter how badly they treat you. If you finally become tired or try setting boundaries, they often act shocked, offended, or hurt, as if your kindness was something they owned. This tactic works because empathetic people naturally struggle with guilt. Narcissists know this. They understand that kind people often fear disappointing others more than protecting themselves. So they push limits slowly until you begin sacrificing your own emotional health just to avoid feeling selfish. Over time, you may start confusing self-abandonment with love. You keep giving more while receiving less, hoping your loyalty will eventually be valued. But narcissists rarely respect unlimited access. They simply become comfortable consuming it. They test your limits slowly. This is one of the creepiest things narcissists do because the manipulation rarely starts with something obvious. In the beginning, their behavior may seem small, harmless, or easy to excuse. They interrupt you occasionally, make subtle, disrespectful jokes, ignore tiny boundaries, or pressure you into things that make you slightly uncomfortable. None of it feels serious enough to cause a major reaction, and that is exactly why the tactic works so well. Narcissists understand that people usually resist sudden control, but gradual control often goes unnoticed. So instead of crossing all your boundaries at once, they test them little by little. Each small violation becomes a psychological experiment. They watch how much disrespect you tolerate, how quickly you forgive, and how easily you doubt your own discomfort. If you stay silent, the behavior slowly escalates. What once felt shocking eventually starts feeling normal. The jokes become crueler. The control becomes stronger. The emotional manipulation becomes more aggressive. But because the change happened gradually, your mind struggles to recognize how far things have gone. Human beings adapt emotionally to repeated behavior, even unhealthy behavior, especially when emotional attachment is involved. This tactic becomes extremely dangerous because it slowly conditions you to abandon your own standards. Every time you tolerate something small, the narcissist learns they can push a little further next time. Over time, you begin compromising more of yourself just to keep the relationship stable. The terrifying part is that you often do not notice the full damage until your boundaries are almost completely gone. By then, behaviors you once would have rejected immediately now feel emotionally complicated to leave. And once someone slowly trains you to tolerate disrespect, controlling you becomes easier with every passing moment. They create emergencies to pull you back in. This is one of the creepiest manipulation tactics narcissists use because it often appears during the exact moment you begin emotionally pulling away from them. Just when you start creating distance, healing, setting boundaries, or finally finding peace, something suddenly goes wrong in their life. There is a crisis, an emotional breakdown, a health scare, financial trouble, loneliness, or some urgent situation that demands your immediate attention. The timing is rarely accidental. Narcissists fear losing emotional control over people, especially when they sense someone is becoming stronger or harder to manipulate. Creating emergencies allows them to regain access to your emotions before you fully escape their influence. They know compassionate people struggle to ignore someone in distress, especially if there was once emotional attachment involved. This tactic works because emergencies trigger guilt, empathy, and responsibility. Even if you were hurt deeply by them, part of you still wants to help. The narcissist uses this emotional instinct to reopen communication and pull you back into the cycle. Suddenly, instead of focusing on your healing, your energy becomes consumed by their problems once again. Over time, this creates emotional confusion because every attempt to leave becomes tied to fear and guilt. You begin feeling responsible for their emotional survival. The moment you create distance, they make it seem as though abandoning them would make you cruel or heartless. What makes this tactic especially dangerous is that some of the crises may contain small pieces of truth mixed with exaggeration or emotional manipulation. That uncertainty keeps you emotionally trapped because you fear ignoring something serious. Eventually, you stop trusting your own desire for peace because every step toward freedom becomes interrupted by another emotional emergency designed to pull you back into their control. They make you feel cruel for walking away. This is one of the most painful tactics narcissists use because it turns your survival instinct into something that feels heartless. After repeated disrespect, emotional exhaustion, manipulation, or emotional neglect, you finally begin pulling away to protect yourself. You reach a point where staying hurts more than leaving, but the moment you try to create distance, they suddenly act devastated, abandoned, or deeply wounded by your decision. Instead of acknowledging the pain they caused, they focus entirely on the pain your departure causes them. That is the trap. Narcissists often wait until you are emotionally drained before showing vulnerability. They may remind you of their struggles, accuse you of giving up on them, or act as though you are destroying something meaningful for selfish reasons. Some become emotional and affectionate overnight. Others portray themselves as victims to mutual friends or family. Suddenly, the person who suffered quietly for months becomes the cruel one for finally leaving. This tactic works because empathetic people naturally struggle with guilt. Even when someone hurts you repeatedly, part of you still does not want to be responsible for their pain. Narcissists exploit that compassion. They know that if they can make you feel guilty enough, you may stay longer than you should. Over time, this creates emotional paralysis. You begin questioning whether protecting yourself makes you a bad person. You confuse self-preservation with betrayal. Even after deciding to leave, you may feel overwhelming guilt, anxiety, or responsibility for their emotional state. The frightening part is that narcissists rarely focus on the damage that forced you to walk away. Instead, they focus on making your escape feel morally wrong, because guilt is often the final chain they use when control begins slipping away. They rewrite the past with confidence. This is one of the most disturbing tactics narcissists use because it slowly destroys your trust in your own memory. Something painful happens. A promise is broken. A cruel comment is made. A boundary is crossed. At the time, the situation felt completely real and clear to you. But later, when you bring it up, the narcissist calmly retells the entire event in a completely different way. Suddenly, they claim they never said those words. They insist you misunderstood their intentions. They remove important details, change timelines, or completely reverse who was hurt and who caused the damage. What makes this tactic so powerful is not just the lie itself, but the confidence behind it. They speak with such certainty that you begin questioning your own version of reality. That is the trap. Human beings naturally rely on confidence as a signal of truth. When someone denies the past with absolute calmness and certainty, your brain starts searching for mistakes in your own memory instead. You replay conversations repeatedly, trying to make sense of the contradiction. The more confident they sound, the more unstable you begin to feel. Narcissists use this tactic to maintain control over the narrative. If they can rewrite the past, they can avoid accountability in the present. They can make themselves look innocent while making you appear irrational, dramatic, or emotionally confused. Over time, this creates deep psychological exhaustion. You may start documenting conversations, saving messages, or mentally rehearsing events because you no longer trust your own recollection. Sometimes you even begin accepting their version of reality just to stop the emotional conflict. And once someone gains the power to redefine your memories, they slowly gain power over your identity itself. They give compliments that contain hidden insults. This is one of the most confusing manipulation tactics narcissists use because the attack is hidden inside words that sound positive on the surface. At first, it feels like they are complimenting you. They smile, speak gently, and say something that almost sounds supportive. But underneath the praise is a subtle insult designed to weaken your confidence while making you feel guilty for even noticing it. They say things like, "You actually look good today," "You're smarter than I expected," or "I'm surprised someone like you could pull that off." The words sound harmless enough that if you react negatively, they can instantly accuse you of being too sensitive or dramatic. That is exactly why this tactic is so effective. The insult hides behind plausible deniability. Narcissists use these disguised attacks to slowly chip away at your self-esteem while protecting their own image. If they insulted you openly all the time, the manipulation would be obvious. But hidden insults create confusion. Part of you feels hurt, while another part wonders if you are overreacting. That internal confusion keeps you emotionally unstable and easier to control. Over time, these comments begin affecting your confidence more deeply than you realize. You may start second-guessing your appearance, intelligence, personality, or worth without fully understanding why. The narcissist subtly trains you to seek their approval while simultaneously keeping you insecure enough to depend on it. This tactic becomes especially damaging because it creates emotional self-doubt. You begin ignoring your instincts and forcing yourself to accept disrespect disguised as humor or affection. Eventually, you may become so accustomed to hidden insults that genuine kindness starts feeling unfamiliar, while emotional criticism begins feeling normal inside the relationship. They make you compete for their approval. This is one of the most emotionally addictive tactics narcissists use because it turns love, attention, and validation into something you constantly feel forced to earn. In the beginning, they may shower you with praise, affection, or intense emotional attention that makes you feel deeply valued, but over time, that approval becomes unpredictable. Some days they seem warm and impressed by you, and other days they become distant, critical, or emotionally unavailable for no clear reason. That inconsistency is not accidental. Narcissists understand that people chase what feels uncertain. When approval is given freely, it feels comforting. But when approval becomes inconsistent, the brain starts obsessing over how to get it back. Suddenly, you begin working harder for small moments of affection that once came naturally. You overthink your words, your appearance, your behavior, and your emotional reactions, hoping to regain the version of them that once made you feel special. Often, narcissists intensify this by comparing you to other people. They mention ex-partners, friends, co-workers, or strangers in ways designed to trigger insecurity and competition. Sometimes the comparisons are subtle. Other times they are painfully direct. The goal is to make you feel replaceable, so you constantly seek reassurance from the very person damaging your confidence. Over time, this creates emotional dependency. Your self-worth slowly becomes connected to their approval instead of your own inner stability. You stop asking whether they are treating you well and start focusing entirely on whether you are doing enough to keep them happy. That is what makes this tactic so psychologically dangerous. The narcissist creates a relationship where you are always performing, proving, and chasing validation while they quietly maintain control by deciding when affection is given and when it is withheld. They isolate you by making others seem untrustworthy. This is one of the most dangerous tactics narcissists use because it slowly cuts you off from the very people who could help you see the truth. In the beginning, it often sounds protective or caring. They may warn you that certain friends secretly envy you, that your family does not truly understand you, or that other people are trying to manipulate you. At first, it can feel like they are simply looking out for your best interests, but over time, a pattern begins to form. They always seem to have a problem with the people closest to you. They criticize your support system little by little, planting small seeds of doubt until you begin questioning the intentions of everyone around you. They may call your friends fake, accuse your family of disrespect, or suggests that other people are trying to turn you against them. Eventually, spending time with others starts feeling emotionally exhausting because the narcissist always creates tension afterward. That is the trap. Narcissists understand that isolated people are easier to control. When you have strong outside support, it becomes harder for manipulation to survive because healthy people often notice toxic patterns quickly. So the narcissist slowly positions themselves as the only person you can fully trust. This tactic works because human beings naturally absorb repeated emotional suggestions. If someone constantly tells you that others cannot be trusted, your brain slowly becomes more suspicious and emotionally dependent on the narcissist's version of reality. Over time, you may notice yourself becoming emotionally disconnected from people who once made you feel safe. Your world becomes smaller, your confidence weakens, and without realizing it, the narcissist becomes the center of your emotional life. That is what makes this tactic so frightening. Isolation does not always happen through force. Sometimes it happens through fear, doubt, and slowly poisoned trust. They act like your needs are dramatic. This is one of the most emotionally damaging tactics narcissists use because it slowly teaches you to feel ashamed for having normal human needs. At first, you ask for simple things: respect, consistency, honesty, communication, emotional support, reassurance. None of these requests are extreme or unreasonable in healthy relationships, but the narcissist reacts as if your needs are exhausting, overwhelming, or impossible to satisfy. The moment you express disappointment or emotional hurt, they sigh, become irritated, or act emotionally burdened. They may say things like, "You always want something," "You're too sensitive," or "Nothing is ever enough for you." Suddenly, your basic emotional needs are treated like unreasonable demands. That is the trap. Narcissists often make healthy needs seem dramatic because it shifts attention away from their unwillingness to meet them. Instead of discussing the actual issue, they focus on how difficult you are for bringing it up at all. Over time, you stop asking yourself whether your needs are valid and start asking whether you are simply too much. This tactic becomes deeply destructive because human beings naturally want to feel accepted and emotionally safe. When someone repeatedly reacts negatively to your needs, your brain begins associating vulnerability with guilt and rejection. You start minimizing yourself just to avoid conflict. You convince yourself to need less, speak less, and expect less. Eventually, you may become grateful for the smallest scraps of attention because your standards have been emotionally lowered over time. The narcissist benefits from this because a person who feels guilty for having needs becomes far easier to control, and that is what makes this tactic so dangerous. They slowly train you to silence your emotional needs until self-neglect starts feeling normal, while emotional deprivation starts feeling like love. They make disrespect sound like honesty. This is one of the most deceptive tactics narcissists use because it allows them to hurt people while appearing morally superior at the same time. They say cruel things, humiliate you, mock your insecurities, or speak to you with complete disregard for your feelings. But whenever you react, they immediately defend themselves by saying, "I'm just being honest," or "I tell the truth unlike everyone else." At first, this can be incredibly confusing because honesty is normally seen as a positive trait. Healthy people value truth, direct communication, and authenticity. Narcissists exploit that idea by disguising emotional cruelty as brutal honesty. They act as if their lack of empathy is proof of strength, wisdom, or maturity, when in reality it is often just emotional aggression hiding behind confidence. This tactic works because it forces you into a psychological trap. If you defend yourself, they accuse you of being weak, sensitive, or unable to handle the truth. Suddenly, the conversation is no longer about their disrespectful behavior. It becomes about your reaction to it. That shift protects them from accountability while making you question whether your pain is even justified. Over time, this slowly damages your self-esteem. You may begin tolerating increasingly cruel comments because part of you starts believing that maybe they are simply telling the truth. Their insults begin shaping the way you see yourself, especially when repeated consistently over long periods of time. The terrifying part is that genuine honesty and emotional cruelty are not the same thing. Honest people communicate truth with respect and empathy. Narcissists often communicate truth with the intention to dominate, embarrass, or emotionally weaken others. And once someone convinces you that disrespect is simply honesty, it becomes much harder to recognize emotional abuse while it is happening. They say they hate drama while creating it. This is one of the most deceptive manipulation tactics narcissists use because it allows them to appear calm, mature, and emotionally innocent while secretly causing the very chaos they complain about. They constantly talk about how much they dislike conflict, negativity, toxic people, or emotional problems. They present themselves as someone who only wants peace, but behind that image, they quietly create tension everywhere they go. They start arguments indirectly. They spread confusion through mixed signals, passive-aggressive comments, silent treatment, jealousy, gossip, or emotional games. Then, when people react to the pressure they created, the narcissist steps back and acts exhausted by all the drama. That contradiction is what makes this tactic so psychologically disturbing. Narcissists understand that people often trust the person who appears calmer on the surface. By constantly labeling others as dramatic, they position themselves as the reasonable one in every conflict. Meanwhile, the emotional damage they caused remains hidden underneath layers of subtle manipulation. This tactic becomes especially dangerous in relationships because it slowly conditions you to suppress your emotions. Anytime you express hurt, frustration, or confusion, they imply that you are the source of unnecessary conflict. Over time, you begin feeling guilty simply for reacting to mistreatment. You start staying quiet to avoid being labeled difficult, emotional, or toxic. What makes this manipulation so powerful is that narcissists often create chaos in ways that are difficult to explain to outsiders. The tension happens through tone changes, emotional withdrawal, hidden insults, broken promises, and psychological pressure that slowly builds over time. Because the manipulation is subtle, your reactions often look bigger than the behaviors causing them. Eventually, you become emotionally exhausted while the narcissist continues presenting themselves as someone who just wants peace, despite being the person constantly creating emotional instability around them. They make you feel guilty for being tired. This is one of the most emotionally draining tactics narcissists use because it teaches you to ignore your own exhaustion in order to keep meeting their emotional demands. After constantly dealing with tension, emotional pressure, criticism, arguments, or unpredictable behavior, your mind and body naturally begin feeling overwhelmed. You become mentally exhausted. You need rest, quiet, or emotional space. But instead of understanding your fatigue, they make you feel guilty for it. The moment you pull back, they act disappointed, offended, or emotionally abandoned. They accuse you of changing, becoming distant, or not caring enough anymore. Sometimes they remind you of everything they supposedly do for you. Other times they become cold and passive-aggressive until you feel pressured to give them attention again. That is the trap. Narcissists often depend on constant emotional access to maintain control. Your exhaustion threatens that control because tired people eventually begin setting boundaries, asking questions, or emotionally withdrawing from chaos. So instead of allowing you to recover peacefully, they make your need for rest feel selfish. This tactic works because compassionate people naturally push themselves for others. When someone you care about makes you feel responsible for their emotional state, you begin sacrificing your own well-being to avoid disappointing them. You ignore your stress. You stay in draining conversations longer than you should. You keep giving energy you no longer have because guilt convinces you that stopping would make you a bad person. Over time, this creates deep emotional burnout. You become disconnected from your own needs and trapped in survival mode. The frightening part is that eventually you stop recognizing exhaustion as a warning sign. Instead, you begin seeing it as proof that you simply have to try harder, even while your emotional health slowly collapses underneath the pressure. They use your forgiveness as permission. This is one of the most heartbreaking tactics narcissists use because it turns one of your best qualities into something that slowly destroys you. Forgiveness is supposed to heal relationships, rebuild trust, and create room for growth. But narcissists often see forgiveness very differently. Instead of viewing it as a second chance they should value carefully, they begin treating it like proof that they can continue hurting you without losing access to you. At first, you forgive because you believe people can change. You try to be understanding. You focus on their pain, their past, or their promises to do better. After every argument or betrayal, you hope the relationship will improve if you remain patient enough. But over time, a disturbing pattern begins to appear. The same behaviors keep returning. The same disrespect repeats itself. The same emotional wounds reopen again and again. That is the trap. Narcissists often confuse forgiveness with tolerance. Every time you stay after being hurt, they quietly learn how much emotional damage you are willing to survive. Instead of becoming more careful with your heart, they become more comfortable crossing your boundaries because they expect forgiveness to erase consequences. This creates a dangerous emotional cycle. You begin believing your loyalty will eventually inspire change, while the narcissist becomes increasingly confident that you will not leave. The relationship slowly shifts from mutual respect into emotional endurance. Over time, you may start feeling emotionally trapped. Part of you remembers the pain clearly, while another part keeps hoping the next apology or promise will finally be different. That is what makes this tactic so devastating. Your forgiveness, which should have been treated with gratitude and care, becomes the very thing the narcissist uses to justify repeating the same harm without fear of losing you. They promise change when they sense distance. This is one of the most emotionally manipulative tactics narcissists use because the timing of their transformation is almost never accidental. For long periods, they may ignore your pain, dismiss your concerns, repeat the same harmful behavior, or show little interest in changing at all. You explain your feelings over and over again, hoping they will finally understand, but nothing truly improves. Then suddenly, the moment they feel you emotionally pulling away, everything changes. They become attentive again, softer, more affectionate. They apologize deeply, promise growth, and speak about the future as if they have finally realized your worth. Sometimes, they even become the exact person you begged them to be for months or years. And because human beings naturally want hope, part of you desperately wants to believe them. That is the trap. Narcissists often do not fear hurting you as much as they fear losing control over you. The moment they sense emotional distance, they recognize that their influence is weakening. Their promises of change are frequently designed to restore attachment before you fully detach emotionally. This tactic becomes extremely powerful because it targets the emotional exhaustion you already carry. After suffering for so long, even small signs of improvement can feel overwhelming. You begin remembering the good moments, the potential, and the version of them you originally fell in love with. The hope of change temporarily silences the memory of repeated pain. Over time, this creates a painful cycle of almost leaving and then staying again. Every promise resets your emotional investment, even while the same behaviors quietly return underneath the temporary improvement. Eventually, You may realize that the change only appears when your absence becomes a real possibility and disappears once they feel emotionally secure again. They treat your patience like weakness. This is one of the saddest manipulation tactics narcissists use because it slowly punishes the very qualities that make someone kind, loyal, and emotionally mature. In healthy relationships, patience is respected. It is seen as understanding, compassion, and emotional strength. But narcissists often view patience very differently. The more forgiving, understanding, and calm you become, the more they begin testing how much disrespect you will tolerate without leaving. At first, the behavior may seem small. They ignore boundaries, dismiss your feelings, break promises, or speak to you carelessly. You stay patient because you believe people make mistakes. You give them time to change. You try to communicate calmly instead of reacting emotionally. But instead of appreciating your maturity, the narcissist quietly learns something dangerous about you. You will stay even when you are being hurt. That realization changes the entire dynamic. Narcissists often mistake emotional restraint for emotional weakness. Every time you forgive too quickly, tolerate mistreatment, or suppress your pain to keep peace, they become more confident that there will be no serious consequences for their behavior. Slowly, the disrespect grows larger because your patience has taught them that your boundaries are flexible. This tactic becomes deeply damaging over time because it traps compassionate people in cycles of emotional exhaustion. You keep believing your kindness will eventually inspire change, while the narcissist keeps using your understanding as permission to continue hurting you. The cruelest part is that you may begin blaming yourself for not being patient enough, even after tolerating behavior that should never have been accepted in the first place. Eventually, your emotional energy becomes consumed by enduring pain instead of protecting yourself from it. And the narcissist benefits from every extra chance you continue giving them. They act generous, then use it as a debt. This is one of the most manipulative tactics narcissists use because their kindness often comes with invisible conditions attached to it. In the beginning, they may seem incredibly giving. They help you financially, support you emotionally, buy gifts, do favors, or show up during difficult moments in your life. At first, it feels comforting. You believe you have found someone who genuinely cares about you without expecting anything in return. But over time, the truth slowly reveals itself. The moment conflict appears, they begin reminding you of everything they have done for you. Suddenly, their generosity becomes a weapon. They bring up old favors during arguments, use gifts to silence your boundaries, or make you feel guilty for disagreeing with them. What once looked like kindness now feels like emotional leverage hanging over your head. That is the trap. Narcissists understand that most people naturally feel gratitude when someone helps them. They exploit that emotional instinct by turning generosity into a psychological contract you never agreed to. Instead of giving freely, they give strategically. Their support is often designed to create obligation, loyalty, or control. This tactic works because emotionally healthy people do not want to seem ungrateful. So when the narcissist reminds you of their sacrifices, part of you instantly feels guilty. You begin tolerating disrespect because you feel indebted to them. Sometimes you even stay in unhealthy situations because walking away feels morally wrong after everything they did for you. Over time, this creates emotional imprisonment. You stop seeing their generosity as kindness and start experiencing it as pressure. Every favor carries emotional weight. Every gift feels tied to expectation. The frightening part is that narcissists often appear most generous when they are actually building control. And once someone makes you feel permanently indebted to them, your freedom becomes much harder to reclaim emotionally. They make you explain simple decency. This is one of the most mentally exhausting tactics narcissists use because it forces you to defend things that should never need defending in the first place: respect, honesty, basic kindness, consideration. In healthy relationships, these things are understood naturally, but narcissists often act as if basic decency is some complicated concept they cannot fully understand unless you explain it repeatedly. You tell them that lying hurt you. They ask why it matters so much. You explain that disrespectful comments affected you deeply. They demand examples, technical details, and endless clarification. You ask for basic communication, and suddenly you are trapped in a long argument where you are forced to justify why consistency and respect are important at all. That is the trap. Narcissists know that emotionally healthy people naturally expect empathy and understanding. By pretending not to understand basic decency, they pull you into endless emotional explanations that slowly drain your energy. The conversation stops being about their behavior and becomes centered around whether your expectations are even reasonable. Over time, this creates emotional exhaustion and self-doubt. You begin carefully over-explaining your pain, hoping that if you say it perfectly enough, they will finally understand. But the terrifying truth is that many narcissists already understand exactly what they are doing. The confusion is often strategic, not genuine. This tactic is especially damaging because it lowers your standards little by little. The more you are forced to explain basic respect, the more abnormal behavior starts feeling normal. Eventually, you may feel grateful for tiny moments of kindness that should have been the bare minimum from the beginning. And once someone trains you to beg for simple decency, they gain enormous emotional control over your sense of worth, safety, and reality inside the relationship. They turn your boundaries into personal attacks. This is one of the most emotionally draining tactics narcissists use because it punishes you for protecting yourself. In healthy relationships, boundaries are understood as normal expressions of self-respect. They communicate what makes you uncomfortable, what behaviors you will not tolerate, and what you need in order to feel emotionally safe. But narcissists often react to boundaries as if they are acts of betrayal, rejection, or cruelty. The moment you say no, ask for space, demand respect, or refuse to tolerate certain behavior, they suddenly act wounded or offended. They accuse you of being cold, selfish, dramatic, controlling, or unloving. Instead of respecting the boundary itself, they focus entirely on how your boundary makes them feel. Suddenly, you are no longer protecting yourself. In their version of reality, you are attacking them. That is the manipulation. Narcissists often see boundaries as threats because boundaries reduce their access to control. A healthy boundary limits how much emotional power they can exercise over you. Rather than admitting that discomfort, they shift the conversation emotionally so that you begin feeling guilty for standing up for yourself. Over time, this creates intense emotional confusion. You start associating boundaries with conflict, guilt, and emotional punishment. Before speaking up, you begin worrying more about their reaction than your own well-being. Sometimes you even abandon your boundaries completely just to keep the peace and avoid another exhausting emotional confrontation. This tactic becomes especially dangerous because it slowly disconnects you from your own needs. You become trained to prioritize their comfort over your emotional safety, and once someone convinces you that self-protection is selfish, controlling your behavior becomes far easier because you begin policing yourself before they even have to. They act like the victim after disrespecting you. This is one of the most emotionally confusing tactics narcissists use because it completely reverses the roles in a conflict. They insult you, ignore your boundaries, humiliate you, lie to you, dismiss your feelings, or treat you with obvious disrespect. But the moment you react with hurt, frustration, or anger, they suddenly shift into the role of the wounded victim as if they are the one being mistreated. That sudden emotional reversal is what makes the manipulation so powerful. Instead of discussing what they actually did, the entire conversation becomes focused on your reaction. They act shocked by your tone. They say you are attacking them. They accuse you of being cruel, dramatic, or emotionally unstable simply because you responded to behavior that hurt you in the first place. Suddenly, you find yourself apologizing for your emotions while the original disrespect quietly disappears from the discussion. Narcissists use this tactic because it redirects accountability away from them. If they can make you feel guilty for reacting, they never have to fully address the damage they caused. Over time, this creates deep emotional confusion because your brain starts associating self-protection with guilt. You begin questioning whether speaking up for yourself is somehow unfair or abusive. This manipulation is especially dangerous because compassionate people naturally feel uncomfortable hurting others. Narcissists exploit that empathy. The moment you become emotional, they exaggerate their own pain to make you feel responsible for comforting them, even while you are the one who was originally hurt. Eventually, you become emotionally trapped in a cycle where defending yourself feels selfish and silence feels safer. And once someone can disrespect you while still convincing you to comfort them afterward, they gain a terrifying level of emotional control over your mind and behavior. They use charm to reset the damage. This is one of the most confusing tactics narcissists use because it makes emotional pain disappear temporarily without ever truly being resolved. After hurting you, disrespecting you, lying, manipulating, or emotionally exhausting you, they suddenly become charming again. Their voice softens, their attention returns, they become funny, affectionate, caring, or emotionally irresistible in the exact way they were when you first connected with them. For a moment, everything feels normal again. That sudden warmth creates emotional relief after tension, and your mind naturally wants to hold on to it. You begin thinking maybe things are finally changing. Maybe the argument was just a misunderstanding. Maybe the person you loved is finally back again. But beneath the charm, the original damage remains untouched. That is the trap. Narcissists understand that human emotions are heavily influenced by contrast. After periods of emotional coldness or cruelty, even small moments of affection feel incredibly powerful. Their charm acts like an emotional reset button. Instead of addressing the harm directly, they flood the situation with enough warmth to distract you from it temporarily. This tactic works because emotionally healthy people want peace and connection. When someone suddenly becomes loving after conflict, your nervous system relaxes. The pain gets emotionally postponed, even though it was never properly healed. Over time, you begin associating relief with reconciliation instead of accountability. The frightening part is that charm can feel almost identical to genuine change. Narcissists know exactly how to become the version of themselves that keeps you emotionally attached. They laugh with you, compliment you, create intimate moments, and temporarily restore hope just long enough to stop you from leaving. And while you are emotionally recovering from their charm, the deeper pattern quietly continues underneath it all. They disappear emotionally, then return casually. This is one of the coldest manipulation tactics narcissists use because it creates emotional abandonment without ever fully leaving. One moment, they feel connected, attentive, and emotionally present. Then suddenly, something changes. Their energy shifts. The warmth disappears. Conversations become empty. Their replies grow distant, dry, or delayed. You can feel them emotionally pulling away, yet they rarely explain what is happening. That silence becomes terrifying. You begin wondering what you did wrong. You replay conversations in your head, searching for mistakes. The emotional distance creates anxiety because human beings naturally fear disconnection from people they care about. But instead of communicating honestly, the narcissist leaves you trapped inside uncertainty while pretending everything is normal. Then, after days or even weeks of emotional absence, they casually return as if nothing happened. That is the trap. They may suddenly text you warmly, act affectionate again, or continue conversations normally without acknowledging the emotional withdrawal that hurt you. This creates deep confusion because your emotional pain is never validated. You are expected to immediately reconnect while ignoring the emotional abandonment you just experienced. Narcissists often use this tactic to maintain emotional control. The sudden withdrawal creates insecurity, while the casual return creates relief. Your brain becomes emotionally conditioned to crave their attention because it feels unpredictable and unstable. Over time, you may become hyper-aware of their moods, constantly trying to avoid another emotional disappearance. This tactic becomes deeply damaging because it teaches you to accept inconsistency as normal love. Instead of expecting stable emotional connection, you start surviving on temporary moments of closeness between periods of emotional distance. And eventually, the fear of losing their attention becomes stronger than your awareness of how emotionally unsafe the relationship truly feels. They make you feel replaceable. This is one of the most psychologically damaging tactics narcissists use because it attacks one of the deepest human fears, the fear of not mattering. In the beginning, they often make you feel incredibly special. They give intense attention, deep affection, and powerful emotional validation that creates a strong sense of connection. You feel chosen, important, irreplaceable. But over time, something slowly changes. They begin making subtle comparisons. They mention other people constantly, flirt for attention, withdraw affection without explanation, or act as if your presence no longer holds the same value it once did. Sometimes they suddenly become emotionally distant while giving warmth and energy to others around you. Other times they casually imply that many people want them, as if you should feel lucky they are still there at all. That is the trap. Narcissists often use emotional insecurity to maintain control. When you feel emotionally safe, you think clearly and set stronger boundaries. But when you fear being replaced, your behavior changes. You become more anxious, more desperate for reassurance, and more willing to tolerate unhealthy treatment just to avoid losing the relationship. This tactic slowly creates emotional competition inside your mind. You begin trying harder to earn their attention, approval, and affection. Instead of asking whether the relationship is healthy, you focus on proving your worth to someone who keeps making you question it. Over time, this can deeply damage self-esteem. You start feeling like your value depends on how wanted you are by them. The terrifying part is that the narcissist often knows exactly how much insecurity to create without fully pushing you away. They keep you emotionally uncertain enough to stay attached, while never allowing you to feel completely secure inside the relationship. They compare you to others to shrink your confidence. This is one of the most emotionally destructive tactics narcissists use because it slowly attacks your sense of worth without always looking openly abusive. Instead of appreciating you for who you are, they constantly bring other people into the relationship as silent competition. They compare your appearance, intelligence, personality, success, habits, or emotional reactions to someone else in ways designed to make you feel inadequate. Sometimes the comparisons are subtle. They casually mention how another person is easier to deal with, more attractive, or less emotional. Other times, the comparisons are direct and painfully intentional. They may praise someone else immediately after criticizing you, making you feel like you are constantly falling short of some invisible standard you can never fully reach. That is exactly how the manipulation works. Narcissists understand that insecurity creates emotional dependence. The smaller your confidence becomes, the more likely you are to seek validation from the very person damaging your self-esteem. Over time, you begin obsessing over how to become good enough in their eyes. You overanalyze your behavior, change parts of your personality, and constantly fear being replaced. This tactic becomes especially dangerous because the narcissist rarely allows you to feel fully secure. Even when you improve something, the comparison simply moves to another area. The goal is not growth. The goal is emotional imbalance. They want you focused on competing rather than noticing the unhealthy dynamic itself. Psychologically, constant comparison slowly erodes your identity. You stop valuing yourself based on your own qualities and start measuring your worth through someone else's approval. Eventually, you may become emotionally exhausted from trying to prove yourself while never feeling fully accepted. And that is what makes this tactic so cruel. The narcissist creates a relationship where your confidence slowly disappears while your need for their validation becomes stronger at the exact same time. They give attention, then withdraw it without reason. This is one of the most psychologically addictive tactics narcissists use because it creates emotional instability that keeps you constantly searching for their approval. In the beginning, they may give you intense attention that feels exciting, comforting, and deeply personal. They text constantly, show strong interest in your thoughts, make you feel important, and create the feeling that you are deeply valued in their world. Then suddenly, everything changes. Without warning, the attention disappears. Their energy becomes cold, distant, distracted, or emotionally unavailable. Messages become shorter. Affection fades. The warmth that once felt effortless now feels almost impossible to reach. And the most painful part is that they rarely explain why. That uncertainty is intentional. Narcissists understand that unpredictable affection creates emotional dependency. When attention is consistent, people feel secure. But when affection appears and disappears randomly, the human brain becomes emotionally fixated on getting the connection back. You begin overanalyzing your behavior, searching for what changed, and trying harder to regain the warmth they once gave so freely. This tactic works because human beings naturally crave emotional consistency. When someone suddenly withdraws affection without explanation, your nervous system enters a state of anxiety and confusion. You replay conversations, question your worth, and become hyper-focused on their emotional reactions. The more distant they become, the more emotionally attached you may start feeling. Over time, this creates a damaging cycle where your emotional stability becomes tied to their unpredictable attention. Small moments of affection begin feeling incredibly rewarding simply because they became rare. The frightening part is that narcissists often know exactly when to return with just enough warmth to keep you emotionally invested. And once someone trains your mind to chase unpredictable affection, walking away becomes emotionally far harder than most people realize. They make love feel unstable. This is one of the most psychologically damaging tactics narcissists use because it slowly destroys your sense of emotional safety. Healthy love feels consistent, secure, and emotionally grounding. Even during conflict, there is still a feeling of stability underneath the relationship. But narcissistic love often feels unpredictable. One day they make you feel deeply valued, desired, and emotionally close. The next day, they become cold, distant, irritated, or emotionally unavailable without clear explanation. That constant emotional shifting creates confusion. You never fully know which version of them you are going to receive. Sometimes they are affectionate and attentive. Other times they withdraw emotionally, criticize you, ignore you, or make you feel unwanted. Because the affection comes and goes unpredictably, your mind becomes trapped in emotional uncertainty. That is the trap. Human beings naturally seek emotional stability in relationships because stability creates safety. Narcissists often disrupt that stability intentionally or unconsciously because emotional unpredictability keeps you emotionally attached. When love feels unstable, you spend more energy trying to earn reassurance and closeness again. You become focused on restoring the connection instead of questioning why it keeps disappearing in the first place. Over time, this creates emotional anxiety and hypervigilance. You begin analyzing their tone, facial expressions, and behavior constantly, searching for signs that the relationship is shifting again. Small moments of affection suddenly feel extremely powerful because your nervous system has been deprived of consistency. This tactic is deeply dangerous because unstable love can become emotionally addictive. The uncertainty creates intense emotional highs and lows that keep you psychologically attached even while the relationship hurts you. Eventually, you stop expecting peace and begin associating love with emotional instability itself. And once chaos starts feeling normal, healthy love can begin to feel unfamiliar, boring, or even emotionally unreal. They keep you hoping instead of healing. This is one of the most heartbreaking tactics narcissists use because it traps you emotionally between pain and possibility. Deep down, you know the relationship is hurting you. You feel exhausted, confused, anxious, and emotionally drained. Part of you wants peace. Part of you knows you need distance in order to heal. But every time you begin pulling away, they give you just enough hope to make you stay. Sometimes it is a sudden apology. Sometimes it is unexpected affection, emotional vulnerability, or promises about the future. They may tell you they finally understand your pain, admit they were wrong, or briefly become the loving person you always wished they would consistently be. For a moment, everything feels different again. You start imagining what the relationship could become instead of facing what it has repeatedly been. That is the trap. Narcissists often keep people emotionally attached by feeding them potential instead of consistency. Hope becomes the emotional chain that prevents healing. As long as part of you believes change is coming, you delay letting go. You continue investing emotional energy into a future version of the relationship that rarely ever arrives. This tactic becomes psychologically dangerous because healing requires clarity, distance, and acceptance, but hope interrupts that process. Every small improvement resets your emotional attachment and makes the pain feel temporarily worth enduring. You stop grieving the reality of the relationship because you remain emotionally focused on what it might someday become. Over time, this creates emotional paralysis. You stay stuck between leaving and staying, between reality and fantasy. The narcissist does not need to fully change to keep control over you. They only need to give you enough hope to stop you from finally healing and walking away completely. They twist your words. This is one of the most frustrating and psychologically draining tactics narcissists use because it turns even the simplest conversation into confusion and self-doubt. You say something clear, honest, and straightforward, yet somehow the narcissist reshapes your words into something completely different. Your concern becomes an attack. Your boundary becomes control. Your pain becomes manipulation. Suddenly, you are defending meanings you never intended in the first place. At first, the twisting may seem subtle. They slightly exaggerate what you said or intentionally misinterpret your tone. But over time, the distortions become more extreme. They remove context, focus on one small phrase, or repeat your words in a warped way designed to make you sound unreasonable, cruel, or unstable. That confusion is intentional. Narcissists use this tactic because it shifts attention away from their behavior and forces you into constant defense mode. Instead of addressing the real issue, the conversation becomes trapped inside endless clarification. You keep explaining yourself, correcting misunderstandings, and trying to prove what you actually meant. Meanwhile, the narcissist quietly gains control because the original problem keeps disappearing beneath the chaos. Psychologically, this tactic is deeply damaging because human beings rely on communication to feel understood and emotionally safe. When your words are repeatedly twisted, you begin feeling powerless inside conversations. You may start overthinking everything before speaking, terrified that your words will once again be used against you. Over time, this creates emotional exhaustion and self-censorship. You become quieter, more anxious, and less confident expressing yourself because every discussion feels dangerous. The narcissist slowly trains you to doubt your own communication, while they continue controlling the narrative. And once someone gains the power to redefine your words however they want, they also gain frightening influence over how others perceive you and how you begin perceiving yourself. They interrupt until you lose your point. This is one of the most subtle yet psychologically powerful tactics narcissists use because it slowly destroys your ability to express yourself with confidence. At first, the interruptions may seem small or accidental. You begin explaining your thoughts, your feelings, or a problem that matters to you, and suddenly they cut in. They correct a detail, question your wording, change the subject slightly, or react emotionally before you can fully finish speaking. The conversation immediately shifts off balance. Every time you try to return to your original point, another interruption appears. Sometimes they raise their voice, sometimes they act confused, other times they focus on one tiny detail that has nothing to do with the real issue. Slowly, your train of thought begins slipping away. You forget what you originally wanted to say, and frustration starts replacing clarity. That is the trap. Narcissists understand that people become easier to control when they are emotionally disoriented. Interruptions break concentration and weaken confidence. The more scattered you become, the calmer and more reasonable they appear in comparison. Eventually, the conversation stops being about the issue entirely and becomes about your emotional reaction to being constantly cut off. This tactic works because human communication depends on feeling heard. When someone repeatedly interrupts you, your nervous system begins reacting with stress and self-doubt. Over time, you may start speaking less, shortening your thoughts, or avoiding serious conversations altogether because expressing yourself feels exhausting and pointless. The frightening part is that this tactic slowly trains you to silence yourself without realizing it. You begin doubting whether your thoughts are important enough to finish. And once someone conditions you to lose confidence in your own voice, controlling the direction of every conversation becomes incredibly easy for them. They say, "I never said that," when they did. This is one of the most disturbing manipulation tactics narcissists use because it directly attacks your trust in your own memory and perception. You clearly remember the words they said. You remember the tone, the situation, and the emotional impact it had on you. Maybe it was a promise, an insult, a threat, or a cruel comment that stayed in your mind long after the conversation ended. But when you bring it up later, they calmly look at you and say, "I never said that." In that moment, reality suddenly feels unstable. What makes this tactic so psychologically damaging is the confidence behind the denial. They do not usually hesitate or appear uncertain. They often say it calmly, almost casually, as if your memory is completely inaccurate. Sometimes they even act offended that you would accuse them of saying such a thing. The more certain they appear, the more confused you begin to feel. That is the trap. Narcissists understand that memory is deeply tied to emotional confidence. If they repeatedly deny things you know happened, your brain slowly begins questioning itself. You replay conversations in your head, searching for mistakes. You wonder if maybe you misunderstood them, exaggerated the situation, or remembered the words incorrectly. Over time, this creates intense self-doubt. You may begin second-guessing your instincts before confronting them about anything. Some people even start saving screenshots, recording details, or mentally rehearsing conversations because they no longer trust their own recollection. This tactic is especially dangerous because it slowly disconnects you from your internal sense of reality. Once someone can make you doubt your own memory, they gain enormous psychological control over you. And eventually, the fear of being wrong becomes strong enough to keep you silent even when you know something deeply hurt you. They mock your pain as weakness. This is one of the cruelest tactics narcissists use because it attacks people during their most emotionally vulnerable moments. When you are hurt, overwhelmed, anxious, grieving, or emotionally exhausted, healthy people respond with empathy and care. Narcissists often respond very differently. Instead of comforting you, they subtly shame you for feeling pain at all. They may roll their eyes when you express emotions, call you dramatic, accuse you of overreacting, or act irritated when you need support. Sometimes they laugh at your struggles, dismiss your feelings, or compare your pain to others in order to minimize it. Other times they disguise their cruelty as advice by saying things like, "You're too emotional," "You need thicker skin," or "Life is hard for everyone." That is the manipulation. Narcissists often see emotional vulnerability as an opportunity for control rather than connection. By mocking your pain, they slowly train you to suppress your emotions around them. The goal is not to help you become stronger. The goal is to make you easier to manage by teaching you that emotional honesty will be punished instead of understood. Over time, this creates deep emotional loneliness. You begin hiding your struggles, second-guessing your feelings, and feeling ashamed whenever you need comfort or reassurance. Even normal emotional reactions start feeling embarrassing because their constant criticism changes the way you view your own pain. This tactic becomes especially damaging because human beings need emotional safety in order to heal. When someone repeatedly mocks your vulnerability, your nervous system begins staying guarded all the time. Eventually, you may stop expressing pain altogether, not because it disappeared, but because you learned that showing it only gives them another chance to make you feel small, broken, and emotionally weak. They use jokes to insult you safely. This is one of the most subtle yet damaging tactics narcissists use because it allows them to hurt you while avoiding responsibility at the exact same time. They make cruel comments about your appearance, intelligence, emotions, insecurities, or personal struggles, but they disguise the insult as humor. The moment you react with discomfort or hurt, they immediately hide behind phrases like, "I was just joking," "You take things too seriously," or "Can't you laugh a little?" That reaction is part of the manipulation. Narcissists understand that humor creates social protection. People are less likely to challenge someone who claims they are just being funny. By turning insults into jokes, the narcissist gains the ability to test boundaries, embarrass you publicly, and slowly chip away at your confidence without appearing openly aggressive. At first, the comments may seem harmless or playful, but over time, the pattern becomes emotionally exhausting. The jokes often target the same insecurities repeatedly. They mock things you already feel vulnerable about. Sometimes they even say deeply hurtful things in front of other people, then act shocked if you become upset. Suddenly, instead of discussing the disrespect, everyone's attention shifts toward whether you are too sensitive. This tactic works because human beings naturally fear social rejection and embarrassment. Many people force themselves to laugh along just to avoid looking dramatic or humorless. The narcissist notices this and becomes even bolder over time. Psychologically, repeated joking insults slowly lower your self-esteem because your mind absorbs criticism even when it is disguised as humor. You begin questioning whether your pain is valid or whether you really are overreacting. And that is what makes this tactic so dangerous. The narcissist creates emotional wounds while maintaining plausible innocence, allowing them to hurt you repeatedly while making you feel guilty for noticing the damage at all. They make you afraid to bring things up. This is one of the most emotionally damaging tactics narcissists use because it slowly trains you to silence yourself in order to avoid emotional punishment. In the beginning, you may still speak openly about things that hurt you, confuse you, or make you uncomfortable. But every time you try, the conversation somehow turns painful. They become defensive, angry, cold, dismissive, or emotionally overwhelming until expressing yourself starts feeling emotionally dangerous. Eventually, your body begins anticipating the stress before the conversation even happens. You rehearse your words carefully. You overthink the timing. You wonder whether it is even worth mentioning anymore. Sometimes you stay awake mentally preparing for a simple conversation because deep down, you already know it could turn into an exhausting argument, emotional shutdown, or guilt trip. That is the trap. Narcissists understand that control becomes easier when people stop speaking honestly. If they can make communication emotionally uncomfortable enough, you will eventually begin suppressing your feelings voluntarily. Instead of addressing problems directly, you start walking on eggshells, constantly monitoring their mood before saying anything real. This tactic works because human beings naturally avoid situations that repeatedly create emotional pain. After enough negative reactions, your nervous system begins associating honesty with conflict and anxiety. Over time, silence starts feeling safer than self-expression. The frightening part is that this conditioning often happens slowly. You may not even realize how much you have changed until one day you notice you are hiding your emotions, minimizing your needs, or swallowing your pain just to keep the peace. And once someone makes you afraid to speak openly, they no longer need to control every conversation directly. Your fear begins controlling you for them, and that silent fear becomes one of the strongest forms of emotional imprisonment. They make peace depend on your silence. This is one of the most emotionally suffocating tactics narcissists use because it teaches you that honesty comes with punishment. At first, you try to communicate normally. You bring up problems calmly. You express hurt feelings, unmet needs, or emotional concerns in hopes of creating understanding and improving the relationship. But every time you speak honestly, the atmosphere suddenly changes. Arguments begin. Tension fills the room. They become defensive, cold, irritated, or emotionally distant. Sometimes they explode with anger. Other times they punish you quietly through silence, guilt, or emotional withdrawal. Slowly, your brain starts connecting honesty with emotional danger. That is the trap. Narcissists often create an environment where peace only exists when you suppress yourself. The relationship feels calm only when you stay quiet, avoid difficult conversations, and ignore your own emotional reality. The moment you speak about something uncomfortable, they make you regret it emotionally. Over time, this becomes deeply damaging to your mental health. You stop expressing your true thoughts because you are trying to protect the temporary peace. You begin swallowing disappointment, pain, and frustration just to avoid another emotionally exhausting conflict. Little by little, silence becomes your survival strategy. This tactic is especially dangerous because human beings need emotional expression to feel psychologically healthy and connected. When someone conditions you to fear your own voice, you slowly lose your sense of emotional freedom. You may start questioning whether your feelings are even worth mentioning at all. Eventually, the relationship may appear peaceful on the outside, but inside you feel emotionally trapped, disconnected, and invisible. The narcissist benefits from this silence because unspoken pain is easier to control than honest confrontation. And once keeping the peace requires abandoning your own voice, the relationship stops being emotionally safe and starts becoming emotionally imprisoning. They reward obedience with warmth. This is one of the most disturbing manipulation tactics narcissists use because it slowly conditions you to associate love with compliance. In the beginning, the pattern is subtle. Whenever you agree with them, prioritize their needs, avoid conflict, or do exactly what they want, they suddenly become affectionate, attentive, and emotionally warm. They praise you, show kindness, give attention, or create moments of emotional closeness that feel comforting and safe. But the moment you disagree, question them, set boundaries, or act independently, the warmth disappears. Suddenly, they become cold, distant, irritated, or emotionally unavailable. Sometimes the punishment is silent tension. Other times it becomes criticism, guilt, withdrawal, or emotional rejection. Without directly saying it, they teach you a dangerous psychological lesson. Peace and affection only come when you obey. That is how emotional conditioning begins. Human beings naturally crave connection and emotional safety. Narcissists exploit this by turning affection into a reward system. Over time, your brain starts linking obedience with emotional relief and independence with emotional pain. You begin adjusting your behavior not because it feels right, but because you want to avoid losing their warmth. This tactic slowly changes your identity. You become hyper-aware of their moods, reactions, and approval. Before speaking honestly, you start calculating whether your words will create emotional distance. Sometimes you silence your own needs completely just to keep the relationship emotionally stable. The terrifying part is that this conditioning often happens so gradually that you barely notice it. What feels like love is actually behavioral control disguised as affection. Eventually, you may realize that the relationship only feels peaceful when you are abandoning parts of yourself to maintain their approval and emotional comfort. They punish independence with distance. This is one of the creepiest emotional control tactics narcissists use because it teaches you that becoming stronger, happier, or more independent will cost you love and connection. In the beginning, they may seem supportive of your goals, friendships, confidence, or personal growth. But the moment you begin relying less on them emotionally, something quietly changes. They become colder. The affection decreases, the attention fades, their responses become shorter, more distant, or emotionally empty. Sometimes they withdraw completely through silence, avoidance, or passive-aggressive behavior. Other times they suddenly act irritated by things they once encouraged. The shift often happens so subtly that you do not recognize it immediately. You only feel the emotional tension growing whenever you begin standing on your own feet. That is not accidental. Narcissists often need emotional dependency to maintain control. When you become more confident, socially connected, financially stable, or emotionally secure, they sense a loss of influence over you. Instead of openly admitting this fear, they use emotional distance as punishment. Their withdrawal creates anxiety, confusion, and emotional insecurity designed to pull you back toward dependence again. Psychologically, this tactic is extremely powerful because human beings naturally fear emotional abandonment. Over time, your brain begins associating independence with rejection. You may unconsciously shrink yourself, avoid opportunities, or suppress your confidence just to restore emotional closeness with them. This creates a dangerous cycle where your growth starts feeling emotionally unsafe. Instead of celebrating your progress, you begin worrying about how they will react to it. Slowly, you become conditioned to prioritize keeping the relationship emotionally stable over becoming fully yourself. And that is what makes this manipulation so destructive. The narcissist trains you to believe that love must be earned through dependence, while emotional freedom quietly becomes something you are punished for pursuing. They act bored when you talk about your feelings. This is one of the coldest manipulation tactics narcissists use because it slowly teaches you that your emotions are unwanted, inconvenient, or emotionally exhausting to other people. Whenever you try opening up about something painful, important, or deeply personal, their energy immediately changes. Their eyes wander. Their responses become dry and distracted. They sigh, check their phone, interrupt, or respond with short, emotionless phrases that make you feel like you are talking too much. The emotional distance feels immediate. Instead of feeling heard, you start feeling embarrassing. You notice yourself rushing through your emotions, shortening your explanations, or apologizing for being upset at all. Sometimes they even act more engaged when talking about themselves, but become visibly disconnected the moment the conversation focuses on your inner world. That difference is intentional. Narcissists often struggle to give genuine emotional attention unless the conversation benefits them directly. By acting bored or emotionally unavailable during vulnerable moments, they slowly condition you to stop expressing your deeper feelings altogether. The goal is not always to openly reject you. Sometimes it is simply to make emotional intimacy feel uncomfortable enough that you stop expecting it. This tactic works because human beings naturally crave emotional validation. When someone repeatedly reacts with disinterest toward your pain, your brain begins associating vulnerability with shame and rejection. Over time, you may start suppressing your emotions automatically because part of you expects emotional disconnection whenever you open up. The frightening part is that, eventually, you stop asking for emotional support altogether. You begin carrying heavy emotions alone while convincing yourself you are too emotional or too much. And once someone teaches you that your feelings are a burden, emotional loneliness can start feeling normal even inside the relationship itself. They make you feel needy for wanting consistency. This is one of the most emotionally confusing tactics narcissists use because it turns a completely healthy desire into something that feels shameful. Consistency is one of the most basic foundations of emotional safety. Human beings naturally feel secure when affection, communication, respect, and behavior remain stable over time. But narcissists often make consistency feel like an unreasonable demand rather than a normal expectation. At first, you simply want clarity. You want their words to match their actions. You want the same warmth they showed at the beginning. You want communication that does not constantly change without explanation. But whenever you ask for stability, they react as if you are asking for too much. They may call you clingy, needy, controlling, or emotionally demanding. If you ask why their behavior suddenly changed, they act pressured or irritated. Instead of addressing the inconsistency itself, they make you feel guilty for noticing it. That is the trap. Narcissists benefit from emotional unpredictability because unstable affection keeps people emotionally attached and anxious. The uncertainty makes you work harder for reassurance, attention, and connection. Instead of questioning why the relationship feels unstable, you begin questioning yourself for wanting stability at all. Over time, this deeply affects your self-worth. You may start lowering your standards just to avoid being labeled too needy. You begin accepting mixed signals, emotional inconsistency, and unreliable behavior because you fear appearing demanding if you ask for more. This tactic becomes especially dangerous because it slowly conditions you to tolerate emotional insecurity as normal love. You stop expecting reliability and begin feeling grateful for temporary moments of attention. And eventually, the fear of seeming needy becomes stronger than your desire to feel emotionally safe, respected, and consistently valued inside the relationship. They treat respect like something you must earn. This is one of the most emotionally damaging tactics narcissists use because it slowly convinces you that basic human dignity is a privilege instead of a standard. In healthy relationships, respect exists naturally. People listen to each other, communicate honestly, honor boundaries, and treat one another with basic care even during conflict. But narcissists often behave as though respect is something you must constantly work for, prove yourself worthy of, or fight to receive. At first, the signs may seem small. They dismiss your opinions, interrupt you, ignore your feelings, or speak to you with subtle disrespect during disagreements. Then, whenever they finally show kindness, patience, or consideration, it feels unusually meaningful because those moments become rare emotional rewards rather than normal behavior. That is how the manipulation works. Narcissists create emotional imbalance by making respect conditional. If you agree with them, support them, praise them, or sacrifice your own needs, they may temporarily treat you well. But the moment you challenge them, set boundaries, or express disappointment, the respect disappears almost instantly. Suddenly, you are treated as difficult, selfish, or unworthy of understanding. Over time, this deeply affects your self-esteem. You begin trying harder to earn treatment that should have existed from the very beginning. Instead of questioning why someone disrespects you, you start questioning whether you have done enough to deserve kindness at all. This tactic becomes especially dangerous because it slowly lowers your emotional standards. You become grateful for scraps of decency while ignoring the larger pattern of emotional neglect. Eventually, you may stop expecting consistent respect altogether, believing love is something you must endlessly prove yourself worthy of instead of something built on mutual care and emotional equality. They use your secrets against you. This is one of the most psychologically violating tactics narcissists use because it transforms emotional vulnerability into a weapon. In the beginning, they often create the illusion of deep trust and emotional safety. They encourage you to open up about your fears, insecurities, painful memories, family struggles, past mistakes, or personal wounds. They listen carefully, sometimes even appearing compassionate and understanding in ways that make you feel deeply connected to them. That emotional openness is exactly what gives them power later. Healthy people protect the vulnerable parts of those they love. Narcissists often study them instead. Every secret you share becomes emotional information they may later use to control, shame, manipulate, or destabilize you. The betrayal usually happens slowly. During arguments, they suddenly bring up painful experiences you trusted them with. They target insecurities they know already hurt you. Sometimes they use your past mistakes to silence you or make you feel unworthy of defending yourself. What makes this tactic especially painful is that the attack comes from someone who once made you feel emotionally safe. The very person you trusted becomes the person using your vulnerability as ammunition. That creates a deep psychological wound because your brain starts associating honesty with danger. Over time, this can severely damage your ability to trust others. You become more guarded, anxious, and fearful of emotional intimacy because you learn that your deepest truths can later be turned against you. Even harmless vulnerability may begin feeling unsafe. Narcissists use this tactic because personal information gives them emotional leverage. The more they understand your fears, shame, and insecurities, the easier it becomes to influence your behavior and weaken your confidence. And once someone can make you afraid of your own vulnerability, they gain frightening control over your emotional world without ever needing physical force at all. They pretend not to understand clear boundaries. This is one of the most frustrating tactics narcissists use because it forces you into an exhausting cycle of repeating yourself while they act completely confused about something that was already obvious. You clearly communicate what hurts you, what makes you uncomfortable, or what behavior you will no longer tolerate. You explain it calmly, directly, and respectfully. In a healthy relationship, that boundary would be understood immediately. But with a narcissist, the boundary somehow becomes unclear. They act confused about simple requests. They claim they didn't know what you meant. They twist your words into something completely different or behave as though your expectations are unreasonable and impossible to understand. Sometimes they even laugh at the boundary or treat it like an overreaction instead of something serious. That confusion is often intentional. Narcissists understand that boundaries limit control. The moment you set one, you create consequences for behavior that previously benefited them. So instead of respecting the limit, they pretend not to fully understand it. This forces you into constantly explaining, defending, and rewording your needs while they continue crossing the line anyway. This tactic works because emotionally healthy people naturally assume misunderstandings can be solved through better communication. So you keep giving more chances. You explain yourself more carefully. You become patient, hoping clarity will finally create change. Over time, however, the constant boundary violations become emotionally exhausting. You begin questioning whether your standards are too high or whether you are expecting too much. Sometimes you even stop enforcing boundaries entirely because repeating yourself feels pointless. The frightening part is that narcissists often understand your boundaries perfectly. They simply benefit more from pretending they do not. And once someone trains you to believe your limits will never be respected, your sense of personal power slowly begins disappearing. They make you feel guilty for having other people. This is one of the most isolating tactics narcissists use because it slowly makes you feel selfish for maintaining connections outside of them. Healthy relationships encourage balance, friendship, family bonds, and emotional independence. But narcissists often feel threatened when your emotional world does not revolve entirely around them. Instead of directly demanding isolation, they usually create guilt around your connection to other people. At first, the behavior can seem subtle. They act disappointed when you spend time with friends. They become cold after family visits. They make sarcastic comments about the people closest to you. Sometimes they accuse others of being fake, disloyal, or a bad influence. Other times, they simply make you feel emotionally guilty whenever your attention is not focused on them. That is the trap. Narcissists understand that emotionally supported people are harder to control. Friends, family, and healthy relationships provide perspective, confidence, and emotional grounding. So instead of openly isolating you, they slowly make outside connections feel emotionally expensive. Every social interaction comes with tension, guilt, or emotional consequences afterward. Over time, you begin avoiding people just to keep the peace. You cancel plans more often. You stop sharing parts of your life because you know it will create conflict or emotional withdrawal. Little by little, your world becomes smaller, while the narcissist becomes the emotional center of it. This tactic is deeply dangerous because isolation increases emotional dependence. The fewer people you feel safe turning to, the more power the narcissist gains over your emotions, thoughts, and reality. Eventually, you may start feeling guilty simply for enjoying someone else's company or receiving emotional support from others. And once someone makes you feel wrong for having healthy connections outside the relationship, they slowly gain the ability to control not only your emotions, but your entire social world. They create confusion, so they stay in control. This is one of the most psychologically dangerous tactics narcissists use because confused people are easier to manipulate than confident people. When reality feels clear, human beings can make decisions, set boundaries, and trust their instincts. Narcissists understand this, which is why they often create emotional and mental confusion intentionally. The more uncertain you become, the more dependent you become on them for clarity, reassurance, and emotional direction. One day, they act loving and supportive. The next day, they become cold and distant without explanation. Their words do not match their actions. Their stories change. Their emotions shift suddenly. They may praise you deeply one moment and criticize you harshly the next. Every interaction leaves you mentally trying to solve a puzzle that never fully makes sense. That is the trap. Narcissists often avoid direct stability because stable people think clearly. Confused people stay emotionally distracted. Instead of questioning the relationship itself, you become consumed trying to understand their behavior. You replay conversations, analyze mixed signals, and search for hidden meanings in everything they say and do. Over time, this creates emotional exhaustion and self-doubt. You begin second-guessing your instincts because nothing feels emotionally consistent for long. Sometimes the narcissist even acts completely normal after causing chaos, making you feel irrational for being affected by it at all. This tactic is especially powerful because the human brain naturally seeks resolution. When something feels unresolved or emotionally inconsistent, your mind keeps returning to it, trying to restore certainty. Narcissists use that psychological tension to keep your attention emotionally locked onto them. Eventually, confusion becomes your normal emotional state. And once someone can keep you mentally disoriented long enough, they gain enormous control over your emotions, decisions, and sense of reality. They act calm after provoking you. This is one of the most psychologically cruel tactics narcissists use because it allows them to trigger your emotional reaction while making themselves appear innocent and controlled. In the beginning, the provocation is often subtle. They make small, disrespectful comments, dismiss your feelings, push sensitive topics, mock your boundaries, interrupt you repeatedly, or quietly do things they know will upset you. Little by little, the emotional pressure builds inside you. Eventually, you react. You raise your voice, become frustrated, cry, or emotionally snap after holding everything in for too long. But the moment that happens, the narcissist suddenly becomes calm, composed, and emotionally collected. They may even smirk slightly or speak in an unusually relaxed tone while you are visibly upset. That contrast is the trap. Narcissists understand that people often judge situations by emotional appearance rather than hidden context. By provoking you until you react, then acting calm afterward, they create the illusion that you are unstable while they appear reasonable and emotionally mature. Anyone watching the interaction only sees your reaction, not the long emotional manipulation that caused it. This tactic works because human beings naturally become emotionally disorganized under repeated pressure. The narcissist slowly pushes emotional buttons until your nervous system becomes overwhelmed. Once you react strongly, they use your reaction as proof that you are too emotional, crazy, or impossible to communicate with. Over time, this creates deep self-doubt and shame. You begin focusing more on how you reacted than on what they repeatedly did to provoke you. Sometimes you even apologize for your emotional response while completely ignoring the manipulation that triggered it. The frightening part is that narcissists often rely on your reaction to protect their image. If they can make you lose control emotionally while they stay calm outwardly, they gain power over how the entire situation is perceived, including by you. They make you look unstable to others. This is one of the most sinister tactics narcissists use because it damages your credibility while protecting theirs at the same time. Behind closed doors, they may provoke you constantly through manipulation, criticism, emotional withdrawal, lies, or psychological games. They push your emotions slowly over time until you become frustrated, anxious, overwhelmed, or emotionally reactive. But when your reaction finally appears, they present that reaction to other people as if it happened for no reason. That is the trap. Narcissists often work very carefully on their public image. Around others, they may appear calm, reasonable, patient, and emotionally controlled. Meanwhile, you are carrying the emotional exhaustion caused by everything they have been doing privately. By the time you react emotionally, other people only see your frustration, anger, tears, or confusion without understanding the manipulation that caused it. Sometimes narcissists even subtly prepare others beforehand. They may describe you as too emotional, unstable, dramatic, or difficult long before major conflict happens. This creates a narrative that works in their favor later. When you finally break down emotionally, it seems to confirm the image they already planted in other people's minds. Over time, this tactic becomes deeply isolating. You may start feeling afraid to express your emotions because you know your reactions could be used against you. You become hyper-aware of how you appear to others, while the narcissist quietly continues provoking emotional distress behind the scenes. This tactic is especially dangerous because human beings rely heavily on social validation to feel emotionally grounded. When other people begin doubting your stability, you may start doubting yourself as well. And once the narcissist successfully controls how others perceive you, they gain not only emotional power over your private world, but influence over your reputation, support system, and sense of reality itself. They tell others a polished version of the story first. This is one of the most calculated tactics narcissists use because it allows them to control how people see you before you even get the chance to speak. After conflict, betrayal, or emotional damage, most people focus on healing or understanding what happened. Narcissists often focus on something very different: protecting their image. Before you can explain your side, they quietly begin telling other people their version of the story first. But the version they tell is carefully polished. They leave out key details. They soften their own behavior. They exaggerate your reactions while minimizing what caused them. They may describe themselves as patient, loving, misunderstood, or emotionally exhausted from dealing with you. By the time you finally speak, many people have already unconsciously accepted their narrative. That is the trap. Human beings naturally trust the first emotionally convincing story they hear. Narcissists understand this deeply. They know that once people emotionally identify them as the victim, it becomes much harder for others to fully believe your experience afterward. Even if you tell the truth, you may now sound defensive, emotional, or bitter compared to the calm image they already created for themselves. This tactic becomes especially painful because it attacks both your reputation and your emotional reality at the same time. You may feel isolated, misunderstood, or deeply frustrated watching people sympathize with someone who privately hurt you. Sometimes you even begin doubting yourself because the narcissist sounds so believable to others. Over time, this creates emotional exhaustion and fear around speaking up. You realize that every conflict may already be prepackaged and presented to others before you even process your own pain. And once someone controls the narrative around your suffering, they gain powerful influence over how others perceive your reality, your character, and your truth. They apologize only when consequences arrive. This is one of the clearest signs of manipulative behavior because the apology is not triggered by empathy, guilt, or genuine understanding of your pain. It only appears when the narcissist realizes they are about to lose something valuable. Maybe you finally start pulling away emotionally. Maybe you stop tolerating the disrespect. Maybe other people begin noticing their behavior. Suddenly, after ignoring your pain for so long, they become deeply apologetic. That timing is not accidental. When you were quietly suffering, they often dismissed your feelings, minimized your concerns, or acted irritated whenever you brought up the issue. But the moment real consequences appear, everything changes. They suddenly know exactly what to say. They promise growth, self-awareness, therapy, honesty, and change. For a brief moment, it can feel incredibly convincing because the emotional intensity of their apology creates hope. That is the trap. Narcissists often apologize strategically rather than emotionally. The apology is designed to stop the loss of control, not necessarily to repair the damage itself. They fear consequences more than they fear hurting you. That is why meaningful change usually appears only when access to you becomes threatened. This tactic becomes emotionally dangerous because human beings naturally want to believe people can change. Once the apology arrives, part of you remembers the connection, the memories, and the potential you once believed in. You begin hoping that the pain finally opened their eyes, but over time, a painful pattern often emerges. The urgency disappears once the consequences disappear. The promises fade. The behavior slowly returns. The apology was not connected to your suffering. It was connected to the fear of losing control over the relationship. And eventually, you realize they did not truly change when they hurt you. They changed temporarily when hurting you finally started affecting them. They say, "I was just trying to help," after controlling you. This is one of the most manipulative tactics narcissists use because it disguises control as care. In the beginning, their behavior may seem supportive or protective. They give advice about your choices, criticize the people around you, interfere with your decisions, or pressure you to do things their way. Whenever you resist, they immediately frame their behavior as concern for your well-being rather than control over your life. That is where the confusion begins. You start questioning whether you are being ungrateful for pushing back. After all, they claim they are only trying to help you succeed, avoid mistakes, or make better decisions. But underneath the concern, there is often an unhealthy need to influence, direct, or dominate your choices until your independence slowly weakens. This tactic works because emotionally healthy people naturally appreciate support from people they trust. Narcissists exploit that trust by crossing boundaries while hiding behind good intentions. The moment you express discomfort, they make you feel selfish or defensive for rejecting their help. Over time, this creates emotional dependency. You begin doubting your own judgment because the narcissist constantly positions themselves as the wiser, more reasonable person. Sometimes you stop making decisions confidently without first considering how they will react. Your life slowly becomes shaped around avoiding their criticism or disappointment. The frightening part is that control becomes much harder to recognize when it is wrapped in kindness. Narcissists rarely say, "I want power over you." Instead, they disguise manipulation as guidance, protection, or love. And because their behavior appears caring on the surface, you may spend years defending someone who was quietly controlling your choices all along. Eventually, you may realize that genuine help gives people freedom, while manipulation disguised as help slowly takes freedom away piece by piece. They make you responsible for fixing what they broke. This is one of the most emotionally exhausting tactics narcissists use because it forces you to carry the emotional weight of damage you did not create. They hurt you, disrespect you, lie to you, betray your trust, or create chaos inside the relationship. But instead of taking true responsibility for the pain they caused, they slowly shift the burden of repairing everything onto you. After the conflict, you become the one trying to restore peace. You are the one initiating difficult conversations, calming emotions, rebuilding trust, and trying to reconnect. Meanwhile, the narcissist often acts detached, defensive, or emotionally unavailable, as if the damage somehow became your responsibility the moment you reacted to it. That is the trap. Narcissists often avoid genuine accountability because accountability threatens their sense of control and superiority. So instead of focusing on what they did, they focus on how you responded. If you became emotional, upset, distant, or angry after being hurt, they treat your reaction as the real problem. Suddenly, you are apologizing for your pain while they avoid addressing the behavior that caused it. Over time, This creates deep emotional imbalance inside the relationship. You become emotionally over-responsible while they remain emotionally careless. You start believing it is your job to hold the relationship together, no matter how much damage they create. Eventually, you may feel guilty whenever conflict exists at all, even when you were the one harmed. This tactic is especially dangerous because empathetic people naturally want emotional resolution. Narcissists exploit that instinct. They rely on your compassion, patience, and emotional labor to clean up the destruction they leave behind. And once someone convinces you that healing the relationship is always your responsibility, they gain the freedom to keep causing emotional harm without ever truly facing the consequences of what they have done. They turn your empathy into a trap. This is one of the most painful tactics narcissists use because it targets the very quality that makes you a good person. Empathy is meant to create compassion, understanding, and emotional connection. It allows you to care about people deeply, forgive mistakes, and support others during difficult moments. But narcissists often learn how to use your empathy against you until your kindness slowly becomes the reason you stay trapped in emotional pain. At first, you genuinely want to understand them. You listen to their struggles, their trauma, their disappointments, and their emotional wounds. When they hurt you, you immediately search for reasons behind their behavior instead of protecting yourself from it. You tell yourself they are stressed, misunderstood, insecure, or emotionally damaged. That is the trap. Narcissists understand that empathetic people naturally focus on potential rather than patterns. So every time they hurt you, they give you just enough vulnerability, sadness, or emotional explanation to keep your compassion active. Instead of focusing on the damage they caused, you become focused on helping them heal. Over time, this creates emotional imbalance. Your empathy becomes so powerful that you begin excusing behavior you would never tolerate from anyone else. You stay longer, forgive faster, and endure more pain because part of you believes abandoning them would make you cruel or selfish. This tactic becomes deeply dangerous because it slowly disconnects you from your own emotional needs. You become so busy understanding their pain that you stop protecting yourself from it. The relationship turns into a cycle where your compassion keeps reopening the door to the same emotional harm, and eventually, your empathy stops feeling like a gift and starts feeling like the very thing that keeps you emotionally trapped inside a relationship that is quietly destroying your peace, confidence, and emotional safety. They make you feel special, then make you feel small. This is one of the most emotionally addictive tactics narcissists use because it creates a painful cycle of emotional elevation followed by emotional destruction. In the beginning, they often make you feel deeply valued in ways you may have never experienced before. They give intense attention, admiration, affection, and validation. They study your dreams, insecurities, personality, and emotional needs with incredible focus. Around them, you feel chosen, understood, and emotionally significant. For a while, it feels intoxicating. They compliment you constantly. They make you feel different from everyone else. They may even say things like, "I've never connected with anyone like this before." Slowly, you begin emotionally attaching yourself to the version of yourself they reflected back to you. Then everything changes. The warmth becomes inconsistent. The admiration turns into criticism. The same qualities they once praised suddenly become flaws. They interrupt you, dismiss your feelings, compare you to others, or make subtle comments that slowly damage your confidence. The emotional high that once made you feel special is replaced with emotional confusion and insecurity. That is the trap. Narcissists often build people up emotionally before tearing them down because the contrast creates psychological dependence. Once you experience the intense validation from the beginning, you spend enormous emotional energy trying to earn it back after it disappears. Instead of questioning why they changed, you start questioning yourself. Over time, this deeply affects your self-worth. You may begin believing that if you can just improve enough, love enough, or understand them enough, the loving version of them will fully return. But that instability is part of the control. The emotional highs make the lows harder to leave, and eventually you become trapped chasing the feeling of being valued by the same person who slowly taught you to feel small. They use your loyalty to keep you stuck. This is one of the saddest tactics narcissists use because they take one of your best qualities and slowly turn it against you. Loyal people naturally believe in commitment, patience, forgiveness, and standing by the people they care about during difficult moments. Narcissists recognize that loyalty very quickly, and instead of appreciating it in a healthy way, they learn how to use it to keep you emotionally trapped. Even after repeated disrespect, broken promises, emotional pain, or manipulation, they remind you how much history you share together. They talk about everything you have been through, everything you once meant to each other, or how much they supposedly need you. Sometimes they make you feel guilty for even thinking about leaving after all these years or everything they've done for you. That is the trap. Narcissists understand that loyal people often confuse endurance with love. The more pain you survive with them, the more emotionally invested you become in making the relationship work. Instead of asking whether the relationship is healthy, you focus on proving your loyalty by staying longer, forgiving more, and sacrificing more of yourself. This tactic works because emotionally healthy people do not want to abandon others easily. Narcissists exploit that compassion by making your loyalty feel like a moral obligation rather than a personal choice. Over time, leaving starts feeling like betrayal, even when staying is destroying your emotional health. The frightening part is that eventually you stop fighting for your happiness and start fighting for the relationship itself, no matter how painful it becomes. Your loyalty becomes the chain keeping you attached to someone who continuously harms you. And once someone convinces you that suffering is proof of loyalty, escaping the relationship can begin feeling emotionally wrong even when your heart is begging for freedom. They ignore small requests until you stop asking. This is one of the quietest but most damaging tactics narcissists use because it slowly teaches you that your needs, preferences, and feelings are not important enough to deserve attention. At first, the requests are small and completely reasonable. You ask them to communicate more clearly, stop making certain jokes, remember something important to you, or simply follow through on something they promised. In healthy relationships, these kinds of requests are usually handled with care and consideration. But narcissists often respond differently. They forget repeatedly, they delay endlessly, they act distracted, dismissive, or emotionally uninterested. Sometimes they agree in the moment, but never actually change anything afterward. Other times they make you feel annoying simply for bringing it up again. Slowly, your small requests begin disappearing into a pattern of quiet neglect. That is the trap. Narcissists understand that emotional control does not always require direct cruelty. Sometimes it is built through repeated emotional dismissal. Every ignored request sends a subtle psychological message. Your voice does not matter here. Over time, that message starts shaping your behavior. You begin asking for less. You stop reminding them about things that matter to you because repeating yourself feels humiliating and emotionally draining. Eventually, silence feels easier than disappointment. Without realizing it, you slowly train yourself to shrink your own needs just to avoid feeling ignored again. This tactic becomes deeply harmful because small requests are often how emotional intimacy is maintained in relationships. They represent care, attentiveness, and mutual respect. When those requests are constantly dismissed, emotional disconnection slowly grows underneath the surface, and eventually you may stop expecting consideration altogether. Once someone conditions you to believe your small needs are unworthy of attention, it becomes much easier for them to ignore your bigger emotional needs too. They make you feel guilty for changing. This is one of the most controlling tactics narcissists use because it punishes personal growth and emotional independence. In healthy relationships, growth is encouraged. People evolve, heal, gain confidence, develop boundaries, and become stronger versions of themselves over time. But narcissists often become uncomfortable when you begin changing in ways that make you harder to control. At first, the changes may be small. You start speaking up more. You become less tolerant of disrespect. You stop apologizing for things that are not your fault. You begin prioritizing your mental health, protecting your time, or questioning behaviors you once ignored. Instead of supporting your growth, the narcissist reacts negatively. They may say you have changed for the worse. They accuse you of becoming selfish, cold, difficult, or arrogant. Sometimes they remind you how easy you used to be before you developed stronger boundaries. Other times they act hurt and disappointed, making you feel guilty simply for becoming emotionally healthier. That is the trap. Narcissists often rely on old versions of you to maintain emotional control. The quieter you were, the easier you were to manipulate. The more insecure you felt, the more approval you sought from them. Your growth threatens the power dynamic they became comfortable with, so they try to make personal development feel like betrayal. Over time, this creates intense inner conflict. Part of you wants to keep evolving, while another part fears hurting people by changing. You may even start shrinking yourself again just to restore emotional peace in the relationship. This tactic becomes deeply damaging because it teaches you to associate self-improvement with guilt. Instead of celebrating your growth, you begin apologizing for it. And once someone makes you feel wrong for becoming stronger, they gain the power to keep you emotionally stuck in the version of yourself that benefits them most. They call your growth disrespect. This is one of the most controlling tactics narcissists use because it punishes you for becoming stronger, healthier, and more independent. In the beginning, they may appear supportive of your goals, confidence, or personal development. But over time, something changes. The moment your growth starts reducing their control over you, they begin reacting negatively to it. Maybe you start setting boundaries. Maybe you become more confident speaking your mind. Maybe you stop apologizing for things that are not your fault. Maybe you begin prioritizing your peace, friendships, career, or emotional health. Instead of celebrating your progress, the narcissist suddenly acts offended, distant, or threatened by it. That is the trap. Narcissists often benefit from versions of people who are insecure, emotionally dependent, or easier to manipulate. When you grow emotionally stronger, you become harder to control. So rather than openly admitting that your independence scares them, they redefine your growth as selfishness, arrogance, coldness, or disrespect. They may say things like, "You've changed. You think you're better than everyone now," or "You used to care about me more." The goal is to make you feel guilty for evolving into a healthier version of yourself. Over time, this creates intense emotional conflict. Part of you feels proud of your growth, while another part feels guilty for upsetting the relationship. You may even begin shrinking yourself again just to restore peace and avoid accusations of being selfish or uncaring. This tactic is especially dangerous because it teaches you to associate self-improvement with emotional punishment. Instead of feeling safe growing, you begin fearing the emotional consequences that come with becoming stronger, and eventually you may realize the narcissist never truly wanted you to thrive independently. They only felt comfortable with versions of you that depended on their approval to feel worthy. They act supportive only when they benefit. This is one of the most emotionally confusing tactics narcissists use because their support often feels real in the beginning. They encourage your goals, celebrate your success, help you during difficult moments, and make you believe they genuinely want the best for you. For a while, it seems like you have someone who truly believes in your growth and happiness. But over time, a disturbing pattern begins to appear. Their support usually exists only when it benefits them emotionally, socially, financially, or personally. They support your dreams when your success reflects positively on them. They encourage you when they still feel in control of your life. But the moment your independence grows too strong, your confidence increases, or your choices no longer revolve around them, their energy begins to change. Suddenly, the encouragement fades. They become passive-aggressive, dismissive, jealous, emotionally distant, or strangely uninterested in things they once claimed to care about deeply. Sometimes they subtly discourage opportunities that could help you grow beyond their influence. Other times, they support you publicly while privately making you feel guilty, insecure, or emotionally drained. That is the trap. Narcissists often view relationships through the lens of personal gain rather than genuine emotional connection. Their support is frequently conditional, even if they never say it directly. As long as your growth feeds their ego, image, or control, they remain encouraging. But when your growth threatens their emotional position in your life, the support quietly disappears. This tactic works because emotionally healthy people naturally assume support comes from love. So when the narcissist suddenly withdraws encouragement, you begin questioning yourself instead of questioning the relationship. You wonder if you changed too much, became too ambitious, or somehow caused the distance. The frightening part is realizing that their support was never truly about your happiness. It was about how your happiness served them.